Welcome to our YouTube channel. Hi guys, tonight we wander back in time to a world where your breath freezes in the morning air and your hands ache before the sun has even climbed over the hedgerows. The year is something like 1250, the heart of a medieval English winter, and you are shivering before a half-colored wee hut on the edge of a muddy village green. The frost has crept into every corner of your world, glittering on straw, stiffening the hair of the ox tethered nearby. You probably will not survive this winter if you do not find a way to keep out the cold. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where in the world you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, let your shoulders loosen and picture yourself breathing mist into a frozen dawn. You wake with the sound of a crow breaking the silence above a field rimmed in silver. The sky is pale gray and your blanket is little more than a rough wool sheet. The cold sneaks through every thread. You can almost hear the tiny crackle of ice forming on the thatch overhead. Somewhere beyond the fence, a stream is locked beneath a thin milky crust, and you wonder how anyone ever managed to build something strong enough to stand against this. Before the comfort of stone walls and sturdy chimneys, most people in medieval England lived in fragile makeshift shelters. These were homes built more by need than by knowledge. Mud, straw, timber, and luck were your tools. The earliest villagers shaped the earth itself into safety, scooping shallow pits, raising mounds and layering what they had. It is easy to forget that shelter did not always mean security. When you push your hand into the damp soil, it clings to your skin with the same chill that seeps into your bones. Historians believe that the very first medieval houses in rural England were what we would call cruise frame huts, where massive curved timbers formed a sort of rib cage for the building. These were often filled with dorm, a sticky mix of mud, clay, straw and animal dung. You might wrinkle your nose at the smell, but it worked. Once dried, it held back the wind well enough to keep life inside and death outside. Still, the debate continues over just how long such walls could last before they began to crumble back into the ground. It is strange, perhaps, to imagine that the same soil beneath your boots could also serve as your insulation. You trudge through the frost toward a nearby cluster of huts, and you can feel the earth changing under your steps, mud where fires have melted, the snow frozen clouds where no one walks inside. The air smells of smoke and damp wool. There are no windows, only a small hole above the hearth to let the worst of the smoke escape. Even so, the air is thick, heavy with soot that stings your eyes. Some nights, when the snow piles up and the door freezes shut, the only light is the dim orange of embers. Under ash, people sit close pressed, shoulder to shoulder, hands cupped around their own breath for warmth. It is here that you start to understand the miracle of surviving the season. You might envy the warmth of a wolf curled outside in its own fur. You hear stories of villages that vanished entirely after a hard winter. Their huts buried in drifts until only the chimney posts showed. And yet life continued. They built again each spring, patching and repairing with whatever the land provided. If the roof sagged, they added new straw. If the walls cracked, they smeared them with more mud. It was a rhythm of endurance as constant as the frost itself. A curious little fact, some early dwellings were partly sunk into the ground, almost like burrows. This helped trap warmth and block the wind, but it also flooded easily when the thaw came. Archaeologists have found traces of these sunken houses in Old English settlements, their outlines forming ghostly rings beneath the modern soil. Whether they were cozy refuges or damp nightmares remains a matter of scholarly debate. You crouch low beside a fire pit, hearing it hiss as wet wood burns unevenly. The scent of smoke lingers in your clothes, a badge of survival. In medieval life, smoke was not just an annoyance, it was a tool. Without chimneys, the smoke filled the room, curling under the roof beams and killing insects in the thatch. The villagers might cough and blink, but they also knew it kept away rot and pests. Strange to think that the same smoke choking your lungs was quietly protecting your home. When night falls again, the temperature drops so fast you can hear the wood creak in protest. The stars seem sharper, closer, as if the world itself is brittle. You lie beneath your coarse blanket, listening to the wind drag its fingers along the cracks of your hut. Your breath fogs in the dark, a small fleeting ghost that disappears before you can see it twice. Somewhere in this silence you sense the beginning of ingenuity, the spark that will, over centuries, turn huts into cottages, cottages into manors and simple fires into grand hearths. But for now you are a villager in a frozen land, surrounded by the smell of earth, smoke and damp straw. You pull your cloak tighter, waiting for the faintest promise of dawn, knowing that tomorrow you must find better shelter or freeze where you lie. The wind sighs, the smoke shifts, and you drift between waking and sleep, held inside a fragile bubble of warmth carved from the endless cold. The next morning, the world is still white and silent. You open your eyes to the smell of cold earth and ashes that never quite went out. The frost clings to the inside of your walls, delicate as lace, and every breath you take feels like swallowing mist. You crawl from your blanket and press your hand against the dorm that holds the hut together. It feels both solid and fragile, a skin made from the land itself. Before people in England learned to shape perfect stones or fire-baked bricks, they turned to mud. Mud was everywhere, free and surprisingly clever. When mixed with straw, it became what builders called cob, thick and heavy and good at holding warmth. Once dry, you scoop up a handful of it and feel the grit slide between your fingers, the faint warmth left from yesterday's fire. It smells faintly of hay and manure, the scent of survival. Imagine hundreds of hands working like yours, packing earth between woven sticks, smoothing it down, patching cracks that the frost keeps opening. This is how shelter begins, not as a grand plan but as a desperate improvisation. People built with what they had, not what they wanted. Historians think some of these early mud walls were several feet thick, more like miniature cliffs than architecture. They would rise slowly, layer upon layer, drying in the rare winter Sunday. A single cottage might take weeks to harden enough to withstand the weather. So people often camped beside their unfinished homes, feeding the fire that would one day move indoors. There are traces of these building mounds still hidden beneath English villages where old foundations were never fully erased. You listen to the rhythm of work, the slap of hands against clay, the crunch of straw underfoot, the hum of cold wind weaving through the half-built walls. Each sound is part of a language you somehow already know. Build or freeze, work or die. A strange but true tidbit whispers through history. People sometimes mixed animal blood into their dorm to strengthen it. Cattle blood was prized for its binding power, though it made the walls dark and smelled like iron when it rained. Was that superstition or science? Scholars still argue whether it truly helped or if it simply made the builders feel protected by the spirit of their herd. You look up at your half-done roof and wonder what the first builders must have thought when the snow arrived early. The thatch is patchy, the beams crooked, and the cold air slips through gaps like a living thing. Even so, it is better than sleeping in the open. Inside, the smoke hugs the ceiling, blackening it like a painting of the night sky. The floor-packed dirt is icy but firm beneath your boots. Someone has spread a few rushes last summer's reeds to soften the ground. They rustle when you move, their scent faintly sweet, like dried hay and river banks. When the walls were new, villagers often pressed small charms or broken pottery into the clay secret gifts to the house itself. Some said they kept away frost spirits, others claimed they made the walls remember the warmth of summer. Modern archaeologists occasionally find these hidden relics, a child's bead, a bent nail, a chicken bone tucked between layers of earth. No one knows for sure what they meant, maybe hope, maybe habit. You watch the oldest man in the village as he repairs a wall by torchlight. His fingers are cracked, his breath shallow, but his movements are sure. He knows the exact color of mud that will dry strongest, the way to twist straw to make it hold firm. He tells you the secret is to build with the seasons. The walls must rise in spring, the roof before harvest, and repairs before winter's second frost. Miss one and the house will weep water all year. By evening the temperature drops again, and you can see a faint steam rising from the walls. The heat of the day is leaving the mud, releasing its breath back to the air. The wind whistles around the door frame, and you wedge a scrap of cloth in the gap. You sit by the fire, staring into its heart, watching tiny sparks snap and vanish like thoughts. You will never speak aloud. Mud shelters were never meant to last forever. They were meant to serve a generation, maybe two, before melting back into the fields. That was their beauty. A house born from the earth would one day return to it. And yet the people who lived inside them were not temporary. Their stories linger in the soil in the way English villages still cluster low against the wind, in the names of places that sound like the ground itself. Clay, Medford, Ditchingham. As you settle for the night, the fire guttering low, you begin to understand why people called the land home before they called it England. Every handful of mud you pack into a wall carries a memory of your body's warmth, a promise that tomorrow you might still be alive. Outside, the stars burn coldly above the village. Inside, your little hut breathes, slow and steady, its skin of earth holding back the dark. You drift into half-sleep, the smell of damp clay and smoke thick in your hair, and for a brief, fragile moment the winter feels almost kind. The sound of axes carries through the frozen forest long before you see the men. Each thud rings sharp against the still air, echoing between the bare oaks. You walk toward the noise, boots crunching through frost-bitten leaves. The smell of sap and cold bark fills your lungs, clean and bitter. Here in the greenwood people come to gather the bones of their homes. Timber is life. Without it, no wall, no roof, no hope of surviving the next blizzard. Records from the period suggest that every village had its own wood right. A man who knew how to read the forest, he could judge by touch which tree would split cleanly, which would warp and which would stand straight for decades. In an age before metal nails were common, these skills meant everything. Wood joined wood by cunning, not by hardware. Pegs, wedges and slots held cottages together as firmly as any modern screw. The air hums with effort as a beam drops the crack of splitting fibers, followed by a cheer. You help haul the log through the mud. It leaves a trail like a wound in the frost. Each trunk will be squared with apses, hunted into posts, then lifted into place. The rhythm is slow but certain. It is the sound of a community building itself, plank by plank. The scent of freshly cut oak is almost sweet, mingling with sweat and smoke from the fires kept for warmth. One curious superstition held that a tree should never be felled in silence. Someone had to speak to it first to warn the spirit within. The belief was that trees could curse a builder if cut without respect. Even in later centuries, some carpenters tapped the trunk gently before cutting, whispering apologies. You imagine that small ritual, under a sky heavy with snow, the words rising as faint mist, the forest listening. Archaeological finds confirm that many medieval houses were timber-framed, their skeletons made of oak or elm, sometimes even chestnut. In southern counties the joints were massive, the timbers hand-shaped and fitted like puzzle pieces. Whole families and neighbors would come together to raise the frame. In one day, a feast followed, if food allowed, though often the celebration was as thin as the broth in the pot. The smell of roasting onions and wood smoke would have drifted between the trees, reminding everyone that warmth could be earned. Not all wood was freely taken. Forest law, especially in royal lands, was strict. Cutting without permission could mean a fine so high it ruined a family. Some records show peasants sneaking into woods at night, axes muffled in cloth, stealing a single log for a roof beam. The risk was worth it. Better a fine than freezing to death. Scholars continue to discuss how much of England's medieval forest truly vanished because of human need. Some argue the landscape was already half cleared by the 12th century. Others think the Great Deforestation happened later, when iron smelting and shipbuilding demanded more fuel. Whatever the truth, you can sense the fear of scarcity in every careful cut of the axe. When you walk among the stumps, you notice something quietly miraculous. Even as trees fall, the forest seems to promise renewal. Tiny shoots push through the snow where branches have broken. Comprising, an old practice still used in some places, allowed new growth from the same roots. Villagers learned to cut carefully so the wood might return in a few years. It was an early form of sustainability, born not from virtue but from desperation. By afternoon, the men have stacked their timbers and wiped their faces with rough sleeves. Frost glitters in their beards. You can see your breath joining theirs in small clouds that vanish into the pale light. Someone hums a tune, soft and low, the kind that keeps rhythm more than melody. The tools are heavy, their handles worn smooth from years of use. Every blow feels deliberate, a promise carved in oak. Back in the village, the logs are trimmed and stacked near the half-built huts. Children run between them, pretending to be lords and knights. Among the beams, the women carry bundles of straw, their skirts stiff with cold. A dog sleeps beside a pile of shavings, its nose tucked under its tail. The air smells of wood resin and damp wool, comforting despite the chill. It is well documented that English builders often reused timbers from older homes. When a family moved or when a storm tore down a cottage, the beams were pulled apart and carried to the next site. You can still find medieval houses today, with reused wood marked by smoke stains from previous fires. Every beam held the memory of another winter survived. As dusk settles, the last load of timber is hauled home by oxen. The cartwheels creak, the animals snort clouds of steam. The path gleams with frozen puddles reflecting the red light of sunset. You feel the weight of the wood on your shoulders, not just its mass but its meaning. Each beam is a future wall, a roof, a line between warmth and death. You stop at the edge of the field and glance back at the forest. It stands dark and endless, both enemy and savior. The cold seeps in again, but your heart feels steadier. The builders have done what humans always do when faced with winter, they have turned the living world into shelter, one tree at a time. You push the door curtain aside and step inside your hut. The fire flickers low, licking at the charred logs. You stretch your hands toward it, feeling the faint warmth travel up your arms outside. The wind begins to rise, and you imagine the forest groaning, softly reshaping itself in the night. Somewhere in that sound lies the heartbeat of medieval England, a world of timber, frost and the endless will to endure. Snow begins to fall in slow, lazy spirals, softening the sharp edges of the village. You step outside your half-finished shelter and tilt your head upward, letting the flakes dissolve against your skin. They melt faster than you expect, leaving faint traces of chill that vanish in moments. Around you, do the roofs sag under the weight of fresh snow? Their golden thatch now a pale, uneven white. This is the test every home must face. It is well known among architectural historians that medieval thatching was both art and gamble. Done properly, a thatch roof could last 20 or 30 years. Done poorly, it might collapse under the first heavy rain. You run your hand along a stack of straw, waiting by the wall, and it squeaks faintly under your fingers. Dry and brittle, every stalk must be chosen for its length, cut after harvest, bundled tightly and stored away from damp when the time comes. The thatcher works like a musician, layering reed upon reed in a rhythm only he understands. The air smells faintly sweet, like hay barns in summer, a strange comfort in the dead of winter. The new roof, tied down with willow cords, glows golden in the gray light. You climb a little ladder and peek beneath the thatch. Seeing the maze of twigs and straw ends packed so tightly that not even a mouse could slip through. Yet somehow water always finds its way in, every storm becomes a test of faith. You might smile at the odd detail that some villagers believed spiders were a sign of good luck in the thatch. Their webs, so they said, helped hold the straw together. Knocking them down could bring rain inside. So when you notice a fat little spider crawling near the eaves, you leave it alone, whispering a quiet thanks, as your grandmother once did. Archaeological surveys reveal that roofs were steeper in the north of England than in the south. The reason was simple: snow and rain needed somewhere to go. A steep roof shed water quickly, keeping the straw drier for longer. In the softer southern climate, roofs were lower and thicker, designed to resist long periods of drizzle. Every thatcher had his secret blend of technique, a pattern of knots, an angle of slope. Few wrote them down. These were crafts passed by memory, by calloused fingers guiding younger ones. The work is dangerous. You picture the thatcher balancing on the ridge in icy wind, his hands red and cracked. He ties each bundle known as a helm with precision, striking it with a flat paddle to make it sit flush. The sound is rhythmic, almost musical, echoing across the empty fields. Below, someone stirs a pot of thin stew and the smell of smoke drifts up to meet him. In church records there are mentions of fires that began in the thatch. Sometimes from a single spark carried by the wind, whole rows of cottages could vanish overnight. Some parishes even banned open chimneys near thatched roofs for fear of disaster. Builders experimented with clay tiles along the ridge, hoping to slow a fire's spread, but in most villages straw remained the only option. It was cheap, warm and forgiving. The villagers trusted it, even when it betrayed them. Researchers continue to question how such fragile materials could survive centuries of weather. The answer lies partly in maintenance. Each year, families climbed onto their roofs, patching holes, combing away moss, tightening cords. The thatch was not a single act of building but an ongoing relationship. You did not simply live under your roof, you cared for it as though it were alive. Inside your cottage you can hear the snow sliding off the slope, the faint hiss as it lands in the mud. The roof breathes, with the weather creaking as the straw settles. You can smell smoke mingled with damp straw, a scent that clings to your clothes. It is not unpleasant, only earthy, familiar, the smell of a life anchored to land and labor. An odd little tradition once common in parts of East Anglia involved placing a roof charm beneath the ridgepole, a hidden talisman made of woven rush or carved wood. It was meant to guard the home from storms. A few of these charms have been found centuries later, blackened but intact, hidden like quiet prayers in the bones of old houses. Some experts think they had pagan origins. Others claim they were simply lucky tokens. No one can say for sure, but it is easy to imagine a thatcher pressing one in place whispering something he barely believes himself. The snow thickens, the sound of the wind grows gentler as the thatch muffles it, turning sharp gusts into low murmurs. You can almost hear the house settling, adjusting alive in its own way. The fire pops softly, sending sparks toward the smoke hole. Each flicker reflects on the low ceiling, painting brief golden shapes before fading. Outside the world is pure white. Inside it is brown, smoky and warm. In the middle, you sit by the hearth and listen to the roof whisper to itself. The air is thick, heavy with steam from the cooking pot. Someone laughs quietly, a tired sound that feels brave against the dark. You realize that survival is not only about strength but about rhythm, the slow, patient repair that never ends. When you finally close your eyes, you imagine the snow melting by morning, dripping through the straw in slow drops that will dry by noon. You picture the spider weaving again, tiny legs dancing in the smoky air. Life goes on, held together by thread, straw and stubborn faith, and somewhere high above the thatch, continues to breathe. The morning arrives, dim and smoky. A pale sun tries to rise behind a haze of frost. Its light filtered through the hole above your hearth. The fire has sunk into red embers, quietly humming beneath a crust of gray ash. You stir it with a stick, watching the glow reawaken like a heartbeat. The room fills with the faint scent of peat and burning oak, the kind of warmth that feels earned rather than given. It is well recorded in manor documents that the hearth was the center of every medieval home. It was not only a source of heat but of life itself. The fire cooked meals, dried clothes, warmed newborns and served as light long after sunset. Without it, there was only darkness and disease. In winter, the hearth became the one spot where survival was possible, and every decision in the household revolved around keeping it alive. The hearth is not large, just a shallow pit lined with stones and ash. The smoke drifts upward, curling around the roof beams before escaping through a small hole in the thatch. Sometimes it does not escape at all. The air grows thick and your eyes sting. You cough, wave the smoke away and laugh quietly. Everyone in your time lives with this. The walls are sure with soot, the ceiling blackened like charcoal, but the warmth seeps into your bones, and that is what matters most. Chroniclers of the age describe how smoke became an uninvited guest that nobody dared chase away. It disinfected the air, kept insects from nesting, and dried the timbers against rot. Even as people complained of coughing and watery eyes, they also understood the hidden value of this smoky companion. It gave their homes a strange kind of immunity. You might find it curious that in some villages the hearth fire was never allowed to die completely. If it went out, people believed it brought bad luck or even death. A single coal would be borrowed from a neighbor to relight it, carried in a clay pot covered with moss to keep it smoldering. Imagine the sight of that dull red glow traveling across the snow. The promise of warmth passed from one house to another. Archaeological excavations have uncovered ancient hearthstones, sometimes marked with carvings of crosses or small circles. Whether they were religious symbols or simple decorations, no one truly knows. Some experts think the markings were a form of blessing meant to protect the flame itself. In an age when fire could save or destroy, people treated it like a living god. The size and shape of the hearth often showed a family's status. Wealthier households built theirs in the center of the floor, large enough for an entire family to sit around. Poorer villages had smaller pits, barely enough to boil a pot. But wherever the hearth stood, it defined the rhythm of life. Meals were timed by how the wood burned, and sleep began when the last light faded into embers. There is a fascinating account in a 14th-century chronicle of a village that suffered a terrible freeze. Every household, it says, gathered their fires together in one large pit in the middle of the square. Families slept side by side, their faces lit by a single shared flame. Whether the story is truth or legend remains uncertain, but the image endures, one fire for an entire community flickering against the frozen dark. Some historians suggest that the placement of the hearth influenced how medieval architecture evolved. Homes without chimneys had to let smoke escape through a central roof hole, which meant no upper floors. Only when chimneys appeared, centuries later, did house grow taller, rooms stacking above one another like layers of warmth. The hearth gave way to the fireplace, and the fire itself became a framed spectacle rather than a smoky survival tool. You sit near your own pit, adding a small log. The flames lick the edges, snapping softly. The sound is steady, comforting, like the pulse of the earth. You can feel heat radiating outward, the chill retreating inch by inch. You hold your hands, close palms pink in the glow. The smoke twists upward in ghostly ribbons, carrying with it the smell of resin, old stew, and a hint of burnt wool. It fills the small space with its own kind of music. Every household had its rituals. Before bed, someone would rake the ashes carefully over the fire to keep the coals alive until morning. In some regions this was called scoring the fire, a word that means to smother gently. You do this now, pressing the ashes in slow circles, feeling the warmth fade to a drowsy hum. The house darkens but stays alive, the air heavy with comfort and soot. A few early texts even describe using dried animal dung as fuel when wood was scarce. You wrinkle your nose at the thought. Yet the heat it gave was steady and clean. Once burning, nothing was wasted. Everything became part of survival. The smell, sharp at first, mellowed into something earthy, familiar. In a strange way it blended with the scent of life itself. When you lie down on your mat that night, the glow from the hearth paints the walls in shades of amber. Shadows shift gently across the ceiling, and you feel the rhythm of the fire in your breathing. Outside, the wind claws at the thatch, but inside there is stillness. You listen to the faint pop of a dying ember, the whisper of smoke slipping into the cold sky, the hearth, your companion, sighs softly like a tired animal settling to sleep. You close your eyes, grateful. Every spark is a heartbeat, every flicker a promise that winter has not yet won. The fire hums, ancient and loyal, the first friend humanity ever made. The cold creeps through the cracks again. Before dawn you wake to a faint whistling, the sound of air squeezing between warped timbers and loose thatch. It feels alive, a sly guest slipping through the smallest gaps. You sit up, pull your cloak tighter and run your fingers along the edge of the door. The wood is swollen from damp and now fits crookedly in its frame. You push it open and frost falls in a glittering sheet. Contemporary records describe how medieval cottages often struggled against the elements. Builders did what they could with limited tools, but wood shrinks, earth settles, and roofs sag. Floors were bare ground, most of the time packed down by countless footsteps. Only wealthier villagers spread rushes or straw, replacing them each week when rot set in the cold, climbed up from the earth like a ghost that refused to stay buried. The doorway groans as you close it again, a tired sound that belongs to both the wood and the wind. You wedge a stone at the base to keep it shut. The floor beneath your feet feels colder than the air itself. You can imagine frost forming beneath the rushes, little crystals waiting to bite your toes. When you step too close, the air smells of damp, straw, smoke and earth. It is not unpleasant, just honest, the scent of living close to the world's edge. There was a curious household trick once used to stop drafts. Villagers packed the gaps in their walls with sheep's wool or moss soaked in animal fat. It hardened as it dried, sealing the wind outside. Sometimes a feather or a small charm was pressed into the crevice for luck. A few of these wish plugs, as some folklorists call them now, have been found centuries later inside old beams, tiny fossils of hope. It is well documented that most peasants lived in one room, houses shared by both people and animals. The family slept in one corner, the goats and chickens in another, their warmth helping to keep the air tolerable. A raised wooden platform might serve as a bed, if fortune allowed, but often you simply lay on straw. The floor itself was part of daily life, a workbench, a dining area and sometimes, on the harshest nights, a burial ground for livestock lost to cold. Researchers have long debated how people tolerated such conditions. Some argue that medieval bodies were hardier, adjusted by constant exposure. Others suggest that hunger and exhaustion dulled the sense of discomfort. Whatever the reason, life persisted. The people of the time understood how to layer their world, insulating themselves not with blankets, but with habit and acceptance. You squat near the fire which has nearly died and add a handful of twigs. The flame crawls upward reluctantly, its light trembling on the smoke-darkened walls. The door rattles again, every gust of wind makes the hinges whine, and you can hear the faint hum of air pushing beneath the roof. You picture the thatch above you shifting slightly, releasing small flakes of snow into the room. One lands on your sleeve and melts into a tiny wet circle. A rather unexpected custom is recorded in a few parish notes from Yorkshire. Some households hung dried herbs above their doors, believing they could calm the wind. Rosemary, mint or sometimes garlic, braided into a rope. It likely did nothing to stop the draft, but it made the room smell cleaner and added a touch of life to the grey winter air. You can imagine the scent mingling with the smoke, a fragile sweetness against the bitterness of the cold. The floor cars as someone moves behind you. It is uneven, worn by years of footsteps, the boards are scarce and precious, scavenged from older ruins or the wreckage of carts. You run your hand along one feeling grooves carved by time and barefoot children. In some houses people spread sand over the dirt to absorb moisture, sweeping it away each morning. Simple, practical, quietly ingenious. A few early builders experimented with raised stone thresholds to block water and wind from crawling inside. Evidence from old village remains shows. These were often built from field stone or even fragments of old millstones. Yet even those could not stop the chill from slipping through. The air always found a way. It always does. When you step outside, the wind tugs at your cloak sharp as knives. The sun struggles through clouds, painting the snow in dull silver. You look at the cottages around you and realize that every wall leans a little, every door warps differently, every roof dips underweight. Yet all of them still stand. They endure through repair, through habit, through quiet stubbornness. Inside again, you sit by the hearth and study the small details that make the house alive, the soot marks rising above the door like smoke ghosts. The faint damp on the floor where snow melted in the drafts, tracing your skin like invisible fingers. You tuck your blanket closer and smile at the thought that this somehow is enough. Life in these walls was not comfortable, but it was shared, the family huddled close together, laughter and whispers echoing softly under the thatch. The floor might be cold, but the sound of familiar voices warmed the space in ways no fire ever could. You lie back on your straw mat watching the smoke drift toward the tiny roof hole. The last light of day fades into the embers and for a moment you can almost believe that the cold has grown gentler, simply because you have learned to live with it. The wind has quieted, and the morning air feels heavy, thick, with the scent of stone, dust and smoke. You step outside to where the manna rises at the edge of the village, its pale walls catching what little light the winter sun offers. Compared to the sagging cottages, it looks eternal, as if it was carved directly from the bones of the earth. You draw closer and run your hand along the wall. The stone is cold, slick with condensation and rough enough to scrape your fingertips. It feels alive, as if breathing, differently from the timber houses behind you. It is well established that stone manors began to appear in greater numbers after the Norman conquest. The lords who owned them wanted permanence, a display of strength and wealth, while the peasants patched their homes with mud each year. These buildings were meant to defy time itself. The walls were often built of limestone or sandstone, quarried from nearby hills and dragged by oxen for miles. Masons shaped the blocks by hand, their hammers echoing across the frozen fields. You watch one such mason at work. His breath steams in the air as he lifts his chisel, tapping in steady rhythm. The sound rings through the courtyard like a heartbeat. Each strike chips away a small piece of stone, each flake, a fragment of history. The smell of fresh cut limestone is sharp, almost metallic. The mason pauses to warm his hands near a brazier. The orange glow reflecting off the half-finished wall. One unusual fact, often overlooked, is that builders mixed animal hair into the lime plaster to make it stronger. The tiny fibers helped bind the mixture, preventing cracks as the walls dried. It was an early kind of reinforcement, discovered long before anyone understood chemistry. If you press your nose close enough, you can still catch a faint animal scent trapped in the old plaster. Centuries later, archaeological evidence shows that these stone walls could be several feet thick inside. The cold never truly left. The same walls that kept enemies out also trapped damp and chill. The rooms smelled of wet stone and candle smoke, and the air clung to you like a damp cloak. The nobles wrapped themselves in layers of fur, yet even they shivered through the long nights. The fireplaces, still new inventions in many houses, roared but never reached the far corners. The sound of crackling fire filled the hall, but the warmth died before it touched the walls. Some experts believe that the grand halls of these manors were designed less for comfort and more for spectacle. The high ceilings, though beautiful, made heating almost impossible. Fires were built so large they smoked the rafters black, and still the guests sat close together, hands extended, hoping for a little heat. You can picture it now, the flicker of torches, the glint of cups, the slow rhythm of cold breath in the air. You notice the smell of mortar, chalky and dry. Each stone bears marks from the mason's chisel, little symbols that identified who cut it. Some were crosses, others initials or tiny shapes. Payment was often made by counting these marks, proof of a day's work. Imagine running your fingers over them centuries later, still faintly visible beneath the dust. Every symbol is a whisper from the hands that built this place. An interesting curiosity, from Manor records tells of rooms lined with painted cloths to disguise the damp. Before wall tapestries became fashionable, people used painted linen scenes of saints or hunting parties. They served as decoration and insulation at once. Over time, the colors faded, but the fabric softened the echo of stone and gave the illusion of warmth. Historians continue to debate whether these early stone halls were genuinely symbols of comfort or just monuments to pride. Some argue that they offered real safety in harsh winters, their thick walls sheltering against storms. Others claim they were cold prisons for their owners. Beautiful but breathless. Whatever the truth, the manors stood like frozen hearts in the landscape, glowing faintly with firelight while the fields slept beneath snow. You walk through an archway into the great hall. The sound changes instantly, softer and deeper. Your footsteps echo on flagstones polished by centuries of use. The light from the hearth shimmers on the walls, leaving streaks of gold across the gray stone above. Beams disappear into darkness, coated in smoke. The air tastes faintly of salt and iron, the residue of years of burning peat. A servant passes carrying a bucket of ash to scatter on icy paths. The motion stirs dust that glitters in the low light like tiny stars. You can almost feel the warmth gathered around the hearth in the center of the room, the slow pulse of life inside a stone shell. In a corner you spot something unexpected, a bunch of dried herbs hanging from a beam. Even in a lord's hall, superstition lingered. Some said rosemary warded off illness, others that it pleased the household spirits. No one questioned it. A loud tradition held power long after faith and reason tried to explain it away. As evening settles you step outside again. The stone walls glow orange, from within a faint pulse of fire light behind narrow windows. The cold wind presses against your face and the house looms above you like a mountain, unyielding yet patient. You understand now that the grandeur of the manor was not in its comfort but in its endurance. It was a fortress against both enemies and the unrelenting winter, a monument to the human refusal to yield. The village below lies quiet, roofs covered in snow, the smoke from hearths rising in thin silver trails. You breathe deeply, letting the chill bite your lungs. The manor behind you stands silent, heavy, eternal. Inside. Someone stirs another log into the fire and for a fleeting moment, warmth flickers against the endless cold. The morning mist clings to the fields. As you walk down from the manor toward the cluster of cottages below, the contrast is striking behind you. The stone walls of the Lord's house shimmer faintly in the cold light. Solid and self-assured ahead. Smoke rises from low roofs, each hut crouched close to the ground, as if bowing beneath the weight of winter. You can hear faint laughter mixed with coughing, the familiar music of a village still alive. Chroniclers from the Middle Ages often described the English countryside as a patchwork of extremes. The Lord's Hall and the peasant's hut stood only a few hundred yards apart, yet they belonged to different worlds. The manor glowed with torches and iron work, the hut smelled of wood smoke and cabbage soup. Both, however, shared one unshakable truth: the cold showed mercy to no one. You push open the door of a peasant cottage, it gives way with a groan, revealing a space no larger than a modern bedroom. The walls are made of wee and dorm, patched with mud. So many times they resemble the hide of some great animal. The roof is low enough that you have to bend your head. In the corner, a small fire burns under an opening in the ceiling, the smoke drifts lazily, reluctant to leave. A woman stirs a pot over the flames and the smell of onion and barley fills the air. Archaeological evidence confirms that such cottages often measured less than 20 feet long. The entire family, sometimes 6 or 7 people, slept in one room together. The animals, 2 goats and perhaps a cow, stayed on the other side of a wooden partition. Their breath warms the space almost as much as the fire. The floor is a mix of earth and straw softened by years of use. An odd practice sometimes mentioned in folk accounts was the habit of hanging old shoes above the door. People believed they trapped evil spirits or misfortune trying to enter the house. Centuries later, when restorers repair ancient cottages, they still find these hidden shoes tucked into beams or chimney corners. It is a quiet reminder that fear of the unseen was as real as the fear of the cold. Inside the hut, the air feels close, almost alive. The children sleep under coarse blankets, curled like kittens. The mother hums quietly, her voice blending with the crackle of the fire. You notice the soot-streaked ceiling and the uneven light flickering across the walls. It is smoky, dim and yet strangely peaceful. Every inch of this place is shaped by necessity. Every object has a purpose. Historical accounts show that peasants used whatever they could find for furniture. A plank balanced on barrels served as a table. Stools were carved from tree trunks. Beds, if they existed, were straw-stuffed sacks laid on the floor. The most valuable object in many homes was the iron pot handed down through generations. Everything revolved around that pot. It cooked the meal, heated water for washing and even held broth for the sick. Some experts still question whether the divide between noble and peasant life was as wide as it appears in records. While the materials differed, the daily struggle against cold and hunger was universal, even in manners. People slept fully dressed. Even kings complained about freezing halls. The peasant hut, though poor, was sometimes warmer because its small size held heat better than any grand chamber. Comfort, it seems, was relative. You crouch near the fire, feeling the heat lick your hands, the smoke prickles your eyes and the scent of stew makes your stomach ache. The woman smiles faintly as she stirs the wooden spoon, moving in slow circles. Steam curls upward, glowing in the orange light. Behind her, the goat shifts and snorts softly, stamping its hooves on the straw. Life here is intimate, tangled and practical, and the manor meals are served, on polished platters beneath carved beams. Here, supper is a single pot shared by everyone, eaten with wooden spoons and fingers. Yet the warmth in this tiny room feels deeper, more human. The air is thick with laughter, coughs and the soft murmur of prayer. A piece of bread passes from hand to hand and every crumb feels precious. A curious piece of folklore claims that villagers used to whistle softly while tending fires, believing it kept the flame awake. You try it now, a low tune, barely audible, and the children glance at you and giggle. The sound mixes with the popping of wood and the sighing of the wind outside. The hut, small as it is, becomes a world of its own. When you step outside again, the air cuts like glass. The manor stands on its hill, silent and proud, while the cottages cluster together like animals huddling for warmth. Both kinds of homes share the same horizon of smoke and frost. You begin to see that survival was not about class or comfort, but about proximity to heat, food, and each other. The sky darkens. Snow begins to fall again, light as ash. You watch it settle on the roofs. The same white shroud covering the noble's hall and the peasant's hutterite. For a brief moment every home in the valley looks equal under the cold. Inside, fires flicker behind shuttered windows, small human hearts beating against the endless winter. The cold wind carries a faint smell of wet earth. As you kneel beside a half-built wall, the structure looks fragile at first glance, a pattern of sticks and mud that seems too delicate to survive the season. Yet there is an undeniable grace in its design, a harmony between human need and nature's resources. You run your hand over the surface and feel the texture of woven hazel rods beneath the layer of dorm, a rough, living skin that has held countless winters at bay. Archaeological discoveries show that dorm was one of the most widespread building techniques in medieval England. It required no sawmills or stone quarries, only patience and knowledge of the local land. The walls were made by weaving flexible branches through upright stakes, creating a lattice that looked almost like fabric. Then a paste of clay, straw, animal dung, and water was pressed into the weave, filling the gaps. Once dry, the surface hardened into something surprisingly strong. You can hear the faint squeak of willow rods as a young man bends them into shape. The rhythm of the work is gentle: weave, press, smooth pause. The smell of clay mingles with the faint sweetness of straw. A woman follows behind him, pressing the dorm into place with her hands, her fingers coated in brown paste. The air is cold, but the work keeps them warm. Every movement carries a quiet urgency. The wall must dry before nightfall, or frost will crack it by morning. It is often mentioned in old guild records that this method lasted for centuries, not because it was easy, but because it was efficient. A good wall could be repaired endlessly. When cracks appeared, they were simply filled again. Whole generations lived and died within walls that were remade each winter, breathing with the rhythm of the seasons. A peculiar detail found in rural folklore suggests that some builders mixed egg whites or even ale into their dorm, claiming it made the walls smoother and stronger. Whether it worked or not is uncertain, but the image of villagers pouring precious ale into mud for the sake of warmth says much about their priorities. The mixture of necessity and superstition, craft and faith defined the architecture of survival. Evidence from several excavations near ancient settlements confirms that the outer surfaces of such walls were often whitewashed with lime. The bright coating reflected light, making the small interiors seem larger and cleaner. It also killed mold and pests. You can picture it now, the sunlight, catching the pale walls, the glow, turning the humblest hut into something almost holy. Some researchers still argue about how these structures withstood centuries of rain and snow. The prevailing theory is that their flexibility saved them. Instead of resisting the wind, they bent with it, swaying slightly like trees. The same principle that allowed branches to survive storms allowed homes to endure winters. They were imperfect but alive, part of the same living landscape that fed and sheltered those who built them. As you touch the wall again, small flakes of dry clay crumble beneath your fingers, revealing the woven rods beneath you trace their pattern, each curve and twist. Carefully planned. The hazel is smooth and cool to the touch. It smells faintly green even now, like memory of summer. You imagine cutting those rods yourself, stripping the bark, bending them over your knee while snowflakes fall on your shoulders. The village hums softly with activity. Someone carries a basket of straw for mixing, children gather lumps of frozen mud to thaw by the fire. A dog noses at the pile of dung, tail wagging, the sound of laughter and labor mingle with the wind. The scene is so ordinary that you almost forget the danger of the season. Yet each handful of mud, each woven branch, is a small act of defiance against the cold. One unusual discovery from the corner of a long-abandoned cottage revealed handprints pressed into the dorm, likely from children who had helped their parents build. The prints were perfectly preserved for hundreds of years. They speak more loudly than any text or chronicle the intimacy of touch, the human need to leave a trace behind, even in mud. As the day fades, the newly built wall glows in the last light of sunset. The dorm has darkened, still wet but firm. The woven lines beneath catch the light like threads of gold. A faint steam rises where the moisture meets the chill air. You step back and admire it, not for beauty but for resilience. The family working beside you begins to gather their tools. They wash their hands in a bucket of icy water, laugh at the streaks of mud on each other's faces and share a crust of bread. The wall stands behind them, humble and strong. It will not last forever, but it will last long enough, and in a world of endless winters, that is all anyone ever asked for. You watch the last smear of light fade from the horizon. The village grows quiet, except for the soft murmur of fires starting up for the night. The wind slides along the new wall but cannot get in. You smile, step closer to the warmth and realize that, for all its fragility, this wall is alive in a way that stone never could be. It bends, it breathes, it endures. Rain begins to fall before sunrise, the kind that whispers instead of crashes. You wake to the sound of it sliding across the thatch, tapping against the dorm walls like gentle fingertips. The air is soft and cold, filled with the smell of wet straw and smoke. Somewhere outside, a rooster protests against the weather, his voice muffled by the mist. You pull your cloak tighter and glance upward. The roof groans under the weight of the water, then suddenly releases it, sending a stream rushing down the slope. Historical building accounts reveal that medieval English roofs were marvels of practical design. The steep gables you see today in old cottages were not made for beauty alone. They were shaped to let snow and rain slide away quickly. Protecting the fragile thatch beneath a shallower roof would have drowned under a heavy storm, but a sharp angle turned the rain into motion, a kind of natural defense against decay. You step outside and feel the splash of cold droplets on your face. The roofs of the village gleam like animal hides, dark and glistening. Each one sheds water differently depending on how it was built and how well it has been maintained. Some roofs hum quietly as rain runs down in threads, others drum like shallow drums. The whole village becomes a living instrument of weather. One curious observation found in old carpenters' notes is that roof builders often worked according to local superstition. They avoided cutting timber on certain days, believing it angered the spirits of the forest, which might cause leaks later. Whether by coincidence or wisdom, many roofs built with such caution survived for generations. You can imagine the builders pausing in the forest, whispering quick words of respect to the trees, before cutting the beams that would one day cradle a family. The smell of rain mixes with smoke from the hearths, creating a scent that feels ancient and grounding. Water trickles from every eave and gathers in muddy pools at your feet. The villagers move slowly through the drizzle, carrying buckets covering firewood, checking the tightness of roof cords. Each drop is a small test. The people know that a single weak patch could mean ruin by morning. Records from monastic archives mention that medieval builders used a variety of roof coverings beyond straw. In richer areas, wooden shingles or stone tiles were used, though these required strong beams to support their weight. Lead sheets sometimes covered church roofs, shimmering like dull silver in the rain. But for most people straw, reed or heather remained the answer. These materials were light, plentiful and forgiving. If the thatch leaked you patched it. If it rotted you replaced a section. It was not perfect, but it was human. Architectural historians still discuss how much of the medieval roof design came from trial and how much from inherited wisdom. Perhaps the villagers did not think of it as architecture at all. Just instinct passed through generations. Yet the results speak for themselves. Many of the same principles survive in English cottages today, centuries after the first thatchers learned how to listen to rain. You crouch beneath an eave watching rivulets of water travel down the straw like threads of glass. The rhythm is hypnotic, steady, soothing. Inside you can hear muffled voices, laughter mixed with the scraping of wooden spoons in bowls. The roof shields that world of warmth and chatter from the relentless gray above. A rather touching folk custom involved placing a small bundle of flowers or herbs at the roof's highest point when construction finished. It was a sign of gratitude, a blessing for the home. In some villages a single stalk of wheat was tied at the ridge to honor the harvest that made the roof possible. Centuries later, people still find these hidden bouquets dry and fragile, tucked beneath layers of straw. You reach out and catch a handful of rain water as it drips from the edge of the thatch. It is icy but clean. The villagers sometimes collected such runoff in wooden barrels to use for washing or brewing ale. Rain from a freshly thatched roof was considered the purest water of all, as though the straw filtered not just dirt but misfortune. You rinse your hands and watch the drops fall back into the mud, disappearing instantly. By mid-morning the rain softens, becoming a fine mist that seems to hang in the air. The village looks peaceful, its roofs gleaming like wet fur. The smoke from the chimneys rises straight up. Pale and lazy, you realize how much the entire settlement depends on these angles and materials, how every slope and curve is an answer to the same question. How do you live beneath a sky that never stops crying? Inside your hut, the air feels warmer now. The fire hisses as a few drops fall through the smoke hole. You smile, knowing that even the best roof leaks a little. You place a pot beneath the drip and listen to the steady link of water. The sound is oddly comforting, a reminder that the world outside is still alive. When night comes, the rain begins again, harder this time. It pounds on the thatch like drumming fingers, loud yet rhythmic. You pull your blanket over your shoulders and close your eyes. The roof groans, the wind hums and the water runs in steady streams. It is a storm, but it feels less like a threat and more like a song, the song of survival, echoing through straw and wood. You drift toward sleep, the melody of rain blending with the slow heartbeat of the fire. The storm has passed, leaving the world damp and still. Smoke rises from every chimney, hanging low across the village like a gray blanket. You step outside and feel the faint warmth of the earth beneath your boots, the ground shoring just enough to soften. A rooster crows again, this time sounding triumphant, and you cannot help but smile. The air tastes of soot and wet straw, heavy but alive. It is recorded in several manor surveys that medieval villages were built close together for more than just convenience. Proximity meant protection both from raiders and from the cold. The walls of one house leaned toward the next, breaking the wind, trapping warmth between them. Each cottage became a small part of a larger body, breathing and heating together. It was an accidental kind of engineering, one born from necessity and habit rather than design. You walk through the narrow lane between houses, your shoulder brushing damp walls. The gaps between them are barely wide enough for two people to pass. The air smells faintly of smoke, cabbage and animals. Somewhere a baby cries, a sound that seems to echo through the timbers. In the space between two roofs, a wooden beam stretches overhead, almost touching both sides. It feels like the village itself is holding hands to stay upright. One delightful but odd detail noted in local parish writings describes how villagers sometimes shared walls with their neighbors. A single timber frame might form the boundary for two homes, saving wood and time. The result was a strange intimacy. When someone coughed or laughed next door, you heard it clearly. Privacy was a luxury no one had. Warmth, however, was shared by all. Archaeological excavations of medieval settlements reveal that homes often faced inward toward a central, green or shared space. Fires burned there during winter, tended by watchmen or by anyone who could not sleep. The glow of these fires reflected off the walls of the surrounding cottages, turning the village square into a great communal hearth. People gathered to share news, patch tools and trade small favors. Even in the dark they found light in each other. Scholars continue to discuss how much this closeness shaped the spirit of English rural life. Some say it fostered cooperation and resilience, while others argue it bred tension and gossip. Both are probably true. When everyone lives within a few paces of everyone else, kindness and conflict grow from the same soil. Yet in winter, arguments soften under the weight of shared survival. You pause in front of an old woman's cottage. The door hangs open just a little and the smell of baking bread drifts out inside. She waves you closer, her hands, dusted with flour. A small oven, little more than a clay dome, sits near the fire. Bread bakes inside, the crust crackling faintly. She offers you a piece when it is ready, steaming and fragrant. The taste is simple and sweet. She smiles, and you notice her breath forming small clouds that vanish before they reach the ceiling. It is well documented that bread ovens were sometimes shared between households. Not every home could afford one, so families took turns baking. The heat from the oven stayed long after the bread was done and people often slept nearby to enjoy its fading warmth. The oven became a silent neighbor, one more participant in the endless struggle against cold. A curious custom from some regions involved covering doors and windows with woven mats or animal hides. During the coldest nights, families would stretch these across openings sealing out the wind. In wealthier homes, thick tapestry served the same purpose, but here simplicity ruled. You run your fingers over one such mat, now rough and warm from the smoke. Inside it smells faintly of sheep and ash. You notice how the lanes of the village twist slightly, curving around old trees or wells. Nothing is straight. Every line bends toward shelter. The cottages crowd together like a flock, their roofs nearly touching between them. The air is noticeably warmer. You exhale and see less mist in your breath. It is not your imagination. The entire village acts like one long cloak, holding in heat that no single house could keep. A group of children runs past, their laughter echoing between the walls. One boy carries a stick with a bit of cloth tied to the end, pretending it is a torch. His friends follow, shouting half-remembered lines from the church sermons. The sound fills the narrow path, bouncing from house to house until it feels like the village itself is laughing. By evening, the smoke from every chimney has joined into one long ribbon drifting toward the woods. The lanes glow with the reflection of firelight through cracks. Indoors, you walk slowly, listening to the chorus of daily life, a cough, a clatter of bowls, a lullaby sung softly. Each sound folds into the next, a patchwork of endurance. You realize now that warmth in medieval England was not only a matter of hearths and roofs. It was a product of closeness, both physical and human. The villagers built their homes against each other, and in doing so they built a community that could survive what no single person could face alone. You turn toward your own cottage, its walls pressed tight against your neighbor's. Through the thin partition you hear a baby's sigh and a woman's quiet hum. The sound comforts you as you lie down the fire. Low beside you, the walls feel warmer, not because of the materials but because of the lives beating softly just beyond them. Outside, frost creeps across the roofs again, linking one to another, until the village sleeps under a single sheet of silver. The night is cold but not cruel, not here, where every breath of warmth belongs to everyone. The morning light slides gently through a slit in the shutter, a narrow line of gold cutting across the smoky air. You rise to the sound of soft hammering outside, rhythmic and patient. The carpenter is already at work. His tools lie neatly on a cloth and adds a wooden mallet, a narrow saw and a few iron nails, so precious that he counts them before every job. You step out into the crisp air and watch him shape a beam of oak, his hands moving with an easy confidence born from years of repetition. It is widely recorded in medieval building accounts that carpenters were among the most respected craftsmen in a village. They built homes, barns, carts and even bridges. Their skill meant survival and their mistakes could mean ruin. Every joint had to fit tightly, every peg had to hold. Without their hands there would be no roofs above heads, no walls against the wind. You hear the sharp thud of the adze cutting into wood. Each stroke releases a curl of pale shavings that scatter like feathers on the frozen ground. The air smells of fresh oak, sharp and clean. The carpenter hums a tune under his breath, keeping rhythm with his work. You can see the lines of concentration on his face, his breath misting as he leans close to the timber inspecting his mark. An intriguing detail preserved in some trade guild writings mentions that carpenters often added small carvings inside beams unseen by anyone but their peers. These tiny designs, sometimes faces or animals, were their signatures, a way of leaving something personal in the structure. Centuries later, restorers find them hidden inside walls and rafters, silent greetings from craftsmen long gone. Archaeological studies confirm that the great wooden frames of medieval houses were raised piece by piece using mortise and tenon joints held with wooden pegs. No iron nails were needed for most of the structure. This made the buildings flexible enough to withstand shifting earth and high winds. The technique demanded absolute precision. Too tight a fit and the timber would crack. Too loose and the wall would buckle. You can almost feel the balance in every blow of the mallet. Some researchers still debate whether the shapes of medieval frames were guided more by tradition or by mathematics. The carpenter's eye, trained by decades of experience, may have substituted for geometry. Yet when you look at the neat triangle of beams rising before you, it feels as perfect as any scholar's drawing. The beauty lies not in symmetry but in the certainty that it will stand. You kneel beside the carpenter as he drills a hole with a bow drill, the soft whine of the tool blending with the rustle of leaves overhead. He works slowly, never rushing. He often pauses to wipe his brow or to test the fit of a peg. His fingers are rough, cracked and steady. You realize that he builds more than wood. He builds the rhythm of the village, one beam at a time. A curious old superstition followed by some builders involved placing a coin or a charm under the first beam of a house. It was meant to bring luck and protect the structure from rot. The coin was usually a small silver penny, though in poorer homes a carved stone or dried flower might serve instead. Whether as faith or habit, the practice shows how building and belief were never far apart. The carpenter straightens and looks at his work, eyes narrowed against the light. The beam stands ready, smooth and pale, marked with faint black lines where the next cuts will go around him. The sound of other work fills the air, the crackle of fires, the creak of carts, the chatter of villagers hauling materials. You realize that every hammer blow, every joint and every cut of timber connects one person to another in this web of winter survival. In the manor records, carpenters were often paid not in coins but in food, shelter, or clothing. Some even lived temporarily in the homes they built, their beds tucked beneath unfinished roofs. It made sense. The craftsman who created warmth needed warmth himself. The village relied on his skill and in return he relied on their kindness. The smell of sap fills your nostrils as the carpenter applies a thin layer of pitch to the beam's end to keep out moisture. The dark resin glistens in the morning light. Sticky and fragrant, it smells faintly of pine and smoke, the scent of preservation. The craftsman wipes his hands on his apron and smiles. His work today will last long after the storm has passed. You stand back as he and his helpers lift the beam into place. The air fills with shouts and the deep groan of wood under strain. The frame rises slowly, catching the light, like a skeleton reaching for the sky. When the final peg slides into its hole, the carpenter steps back, crosses himself and nods with quiet satisfaction. By evening the structure stands complete, stark, against the setting. Sunday, the smell of wood lingers, mixed with sweat and laughter. The carpenter sits near the fire sharpening his tools, his movements slow and practiced. He does not speak much, but you can feel the calm pride radiating from him. The house now has its bones and those bones will hold warmth for generations. You walk home under a sky sure with pale clouds. The wind has dropped, and the village is still in the distance. You can see the new frame silhouetted against the horizon, strong and simple. It is not just a shelter, it is a promise carved in oak. You smile, knowing that when the snow returns, the beams will grow softly but stand firm, carrying the memory of the hands that shaped them. The next day dawns in a haze of gray smoke and weak sunlight. The cold still grips the village, but something feels different. A strange new scent floats on the air, sharper and more metallic than wood smoke. You follow it toward a nearby cottage where a small crowd has gathered. They are watching a mason and a blacksmith argue gently over a stack of newly fired bricks. It takes you a moment to understand what you are looking at, the early shape of a chimney. According to surviving records from the late 13th century, chimneys began to appear gradually in English homes. Before that, smoke from open hearths simply drifted out through roof holes or unglazed windows. The idea of guiding it through a vertical shaft was revolutionary. It changed not just the architecture of homes but also how people lived inside them. For the first time, families could build fires against walls rather than in the middle of the floor. That meant smaller rooms, warmer spaces, and cleaner air. The mason chips at the edge of a brick, testing its hardness. The sound is sharp and rhythmic, echoing off nearby walls. Each brick is slightly uneven, handmade from the same clay that built the dorm cottages. The color is a deep earthy red, still faintly warm from the kiln. The smell of iron from the blacksmith's tools mingles with the tang of wet mortar. You can taste grit on the wind. A curious note in one old guild ledger mentions that the first chimneys were considered a luxury, a sign of modernity and status. Villagers would walk past new houses and marvel at the thin trail of smoke rising straight into the sky rather than curling through a broken roof. It must have seemed like a small miracle, an invention that separated smoke from life. Archaeological evidence supports this slow transformation. At first, only manors and wealthy town houses had chimneys, often massive constructions built of stone with flared tops to prevent downdrafts. Peasant homes continued with open hearths for generations. The shift took centuries, but it began with moments like this: a mason's careful placement of a brick, a spark of curiosity about how the air might move differently. Researchers are divided on who first introduced the chimney to England. Some claim it came from the Norman influence after the conquest, others that it developed independently through necessity. What is certain is that the change was both architectural and social. The chimney allowed for privacy. Separate rooms could now have their own fires, each one small and contained. Families could sleep apart, breathe easier and dream without choking on soot. You crouch beside the workers as they build upward layer by layer. The mortar squelches softly under the mason's tell. The chimney begins to rise narrow and proud, a column of promise against the dull sky. The villagers murmur approval, though some look skeptical. A few whisper that trapping smoke might anger the household spirits. Old habits die slowly. One delightful yet strange belief from the period suggested that fairies and protective spirits traveled through smoke. Some villagers refused to cap their chimneys entirely, fearing to block the passage of their unseen guests. Even when architecture advanced, superstition found a way to coexist. By midday the structure is complete. The mason steps back, wiping his hands, his face streaked with soot and pride. The chimney leans ever so slightly, but it stands. A boy climbs onto the roof and shouts as a puff of smoke rises cleanly into the cold air. The crowd cheers softly, half in wonder, half in disbelief. Inside the cottage, the difference is immediate. The air feels clearer. The fire burns brighter, fed by the new draft that pulls fresh air through the room. You sit near the hearth and breathe deeply, realizing for the first time that the smoke no longer stings your eyes. The light from the flames dances higher, painting the new brickwork in orange. It feels like watching progress itself take shape. It is well noted in old domestic records that chimneys reshaped how people built their furniture and arranged their homes. With fires now against walls, space opened up in the center of the room. Benches, tables and beds could move closer together, making interiors cozier. The new warmth changed behavior too. People lingered longer indoors, read or prayed by steadier light, and spoke of winter less as an enemy and more as a season to endure. You glance up the shaft of the chimney watching sparks spiral into the dark. They rise like fleeting stars, tiny and bright, before fading into the morning sky. Outside, the smoke rises in a single thin line. Graceful and calm, the mason closes his tools and takes a long look at his work. His voice is low, almost reverent. When he says that every brick is a breath of fire turned solid, you understand what he means. The chimney is both conduit and guardian, the line between human warmth and the endless cold. As evening comes, the air outside smells cleaner. The cottages glow faintly, their new chimneys puffing smoke into the twilight. The village feels different, older in one sense and strangely younger in another, as if innovation has breathed new life into ancient bones. You walk home beneath this new skyline where slender plumes mark every half that has learned to reach upward. Inside your own hut you sit by the same humble fire now, imagining what it might feel like to have that clean column of air carrying the smoke away. For now, you breathe through the haze and listen to the faint hiss of the burning wood. Change, you think, always begins with a single spark. The snow has stopped, leaving behind a quiet brightness that hurts your eyes at first. The village glistens, every roof dusted with light. You notice the faint sparkle of frost along the window panes of a nearby cottage. The light catches on something dull and uneven, and you realize the glass is not glass at all. You step closer, curious, and see that the window is made of thin sheets of horn, scraped until translucent. Historical references in memorial inventories confirm that real glass windows were rare in medieval England, reserved for cathedrals, monasteries, and the richest estates. For everyone else, horn was the best substitute. Cow or ox horn was soaked, flattened and shaved thin until light could pass through. It gave rooms a pale, waxy glow, dim but steady. When you touch it, the surface feels slightly greasy, warm to your fingers even in the cold. Inside, the window filters daylight into soft gold. The air feels gentler, the shadows less sharp. Children sit near it, mending nets and toys by the weak light. The smell of beeswax and wood smoke fills the air, blending into something faintly sweet. You can hear the faint rattle of the wind outside, muffled by the horn's thin skin. It is not perfect, but it turns the cold light off winter into something kind. An unusual little detail found in the notes of a 16th-century craftsman mentions that some people rubbed their horn panes with butter to make them clearer. The result was temporary, but for a few days the world outside looked brighter, as though spring had come early. You can almost imagine the delight of a family seeing color again after weeks of dimness. Archaeological finds confirm that even before horn, parchment or thin linen soaked in oil was used to cover window openings, these materials blocked drafts while allowing a faint glow to pass through. The smell of oil must have filled every corner, mingling with smoke and food. Such windows could not be opened, so smoke found its way through roof gaps or door cracks. Still, they were treasured. Having even one small opening covered with horn or oiled cloth meant a home belonged to someone who was surviving rather than merely enduring. Historians still argue about when small glass panes began to appear in rural England. Some claim the early 15th century saw their spread beyond monasteries, others believe they remained rare until Tuna times. What everyone agrees on is the symbolic weight of windows. To have one meant hope, visibility, connection to the outside world. Even in the frozen heart of winter you sit near the horn pane and watch the light shift as clouds pass overhead. The surface ripples slightly like frozen water. Beyond it, you can see vague shapes moving in the snow, a figure carrying firewood, a dog trotting behind. Everything outside looks softer, dreamlike. The window blurs the harshness of the world, turning it into art. A curious superstition lingered in some villages, never to look directly through a window at sunrise lest you invite illness or sorrow. Perhaps it came from the habit of keeping shutters closed to hold in warmth, or perhaps from the fear of spirits said to wander at dawn. Even so, a few brave souls would lift the wooden shutter just enough to catch the first light of morning, believing it gave strength to the soul. The carpenter who made these frames used oak or ash cut into simple squares. The horn sheets are held in place by thin strips of lead or wooden slats. When you look closer you notice tiny imperfections, a scratch here, a bubble there, a thin seam where two pieces overlap. The craftsmanship is rough but careful. Each floor tells a story of effort and adaptation. Inside, a young girl traces shapes on the horn pane with her fingertip. Her breath fogs the surface, and she draws a sun, smiling faintly. The image fades almost instantly, but for a moment it glows golden. You can feel the fragile tenderness of that moment, the human impulse to decorate even the most meager thing with hope. The window also changes the sound of the room. Without open air, voices become softer, the world quieter. You can hear your own breathing, the crackle of the fire, the gentle drip of melting snow. Outside, the air feels held as if the house itself has taken a deep breath and decided to keep it. In wealthier homes, glass panes were eventually fitted into lead frames, called casements. They shimmered in candlelight, casting tiny patterns of color on the walls. Visitors would marvel at them, touching the surface with reverence. But here, in this small hut, even horn achieves something sacred. It gives shape to light, turning survival into a form of beauty. You step outside again and glance at the other cottages. Most have no windows at all, only small shutters that can be opened briefly during the day. Smoke curls from their chimneys, staining the surrounding snow. Gray, the air smells of wood ash and wet straw, of life persisting in the cold. As dusk falls, a soft glow leaks through the horn pane, faint but golden. From the outside it looks like a small lantern in the snow. You stand there for a moment watching it flicker, before turning back toward the fire. You understand now that the people of this time did not live in darkness. Not really. They carried light inside their homes, even when the sky forgot to give it freely. The air outside is sharp enough to sting your nose, but inside the cottage it smells alive. A mixture of smoke, peat, tallow and damp wool wraps around you the moment you open the door. It is a scent both heavy and comforting, like the memory of warmth itself. You breathe it in and understand that to live through winter in medieval England was to live inside a world of smells, each one telling its own story. Of survival. Household accounts from the 14th century record the daily use of peat, wood, and dried dung for fuel. Each left its own aroma. Peat filled the air with a dark, earthy perfume, heavy and lingering, while oak wood gave a cleaner, sweeter smoke. Dung burned with a surprisingly steady heat and very little flame, but the smell clung to clothes for days. When the door opened, these scents drifted into the village lanes, carrying with them a map of who was burning what. You sit close to the fire and notice how the smoke curls lazily before escaping through the hole above. The walls are streaked black where years of soot have gathered. You can almost read time itself in the layers of darkness. Like rings inside a tree. The floor is scattered with rushes, replaced just last week now fragrant with herbs. Their scent, though faint, cuts through the heavier smells and brings a kind of freshness to the room. It was common practice to mix herbs such as lavender, sage and meadow into the rushes on the floor. Records from noble households show this tradition spreading even to simple cottages, though peasants used whatever grew nearby. When the rushes were trampled, the oils released subtle scents that masked the musty odor of earth and smoke. The floor became not just insulation but also a perfumed carpet that changed with every season. A curious custom mentioned in several folktales tells of burning dried orange peels or apple skins in the hearth to sweeten the room. Oranges were rare and precious, traded from far lands. But even a single peel dropped onto hot coals filled a cottage with fragrance. The villagers believed such scents pleased the household spirits and encouraged good health. You can almost hear the hiss of peel meeting fire, a small luxury turning into perfume. Archaeological studies have revealed traces of tallow and beeswax on walls and ceilings, suggesting that the smell of burning candles was constant. Tallow, made from animal fat, gave off a sour, smoky odor, especially when the wick smoked. In wealthier homes, beeswax candles burned cleaner and filled rooms with a faint sweetness. The difference was striking. The poor lived in a haze of sour smoke, while the rich breathed honeyed air. Some experts still debate whether the heavy scents of daily life were merely tolerated or deeply valued. To modern senses they might seem unpleasant, yet for those who lived then they were the smell of safety. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant warmth. Even the stench of wet wool drying by the hearth meant that someone had survived the storm to wear it again. You take a deep breath and catch hints of everything at once: the earth, the wood, the smoke, the herbs, and something faintly animal. It is not perfume, but it is life distilled into scent. The warmth from the fire deepens it, filling your lungs and reminding you that this air, heavy and imperfect, is what keeps people alive. A rather eccentric practice described in some medieval household manuals involved sprinkling ale on the hearth before lighting the fire, said to ensure a pleasant aroma. Some claimed it made the smoke softer. Others said it was simply an offering to luck. Whatever its purpose, the sound of ale sizzling on hot coals must have brought a brief cheer to a cold morning. The smell of food joins the mix now. A pot of pottage simmers, gently, sending up waves of steam. You can taste onions, barley, and herbs in the air before you even touch a spoon. The smell of boiling broth mingles with the smoke, seeping into the rushes and clothing until it becomes part of the very fabric of the home. As you sit, you notice how each scent has its place in the rhythm of life. Morning smells of ashes and damp straw, afternoon carries the sweetness of cooking, night brings the stronger odor of tallow and wool. The seasons themselves change the perfume of the home and people learn to read the air like a calendar. You realize now that survival in this world is as much about endurance of smell as it is of cold. There is comfort hidden in those thick smoky layers. The fire hisses softly, the rushes crackle underfoot, and the scent of earth and life swirls around you like a cloak. Outside, the night deepens and frost begins to crawl across the window pane. Inside, the smell of peat and herbs grows stronger, richer, almost sweet. You close your eyes and breathe slowly, letting the warmth sink into your chest. The air is imperfect, heavy, alive. It tells you without words that this house still breathes, still shelters, still remembers. The wind has changed direction. You can hear it in the way the smoke moves, curling sideways instead of straight up. Outside, snow lies in dull ridges trampled by hooves and boots. Inside the cottage there is movement that feels almost like breathing. You turn toward the corner and see the source of it, a pig content and half asleep nestled in straw beside a low wooden partition. Its soft grunts mix with the crackle of the fire. The air is thick with the scent of hay, dung, and warmth. Household records and agricultural writings from the 13th century describe how peasants often shared their homes with their animals during winter. The reasons were simple: livestock were precious, too valuable to lose to frost or thieves. But there was also a hidden benefit: the heat of their bodies kept the small huts warmer than any hearth could manage alone. In many English villages pigs, goats, chickens and even calves spent the coldest months inside with their owners. You watch the pig shift in its sleep, steaming faintly in the firelight. Its warmth fills the air, a kind of living insulation. The goat in the corner chews lazily on old straw, its bell tinkling softly. You can hear the rhythmic sound of a cow breathing slow and deep, a heartbeat made of breath. The animals are quiet, comfortable, part of the household in every sense. An odd yet charming note from a medieval diary mentions that children were often lulled to sleep by the sound of their cows breathing. The low, steady rhythm comforted them through long nights when wind clawed at the walls. Some even believed that sleeping near a cow gave you strength. By morning, the line between superstition and practicality blurred as it so often did. Archaeological evidence supports the idea that animal stalls were built directly into the structure of houses. You can still find traces of these layouts in old ruins: a raised hearth on one side, sleeping mats on the other, and a partition of rough boards. Or woven reeds dividing people from beasts. The floor was layered with straw that absorbed both warmth and waste, replaced only when it became too filthy to bear. It was not elegant, but it worked. Researchers continue to discuss how people balanced hygiene with necessity. Some argue that the closeness between animals and humans led to sickness, while others believe the warmth saved far more lives than it endangered. It is hard to imagine that anyone in those winters cared much for theory. You simply did what the cold allowed. The room is alive with small noises: the snuffle of the pig, the faint cluck of a chicken shifting on its perch, the hiss of the fire. You feel their warmth on your skin even from a few feet away. It is not just heat, it is presence, a reminder that survival is shared. The air smells of hay and smoke, unpleasant by modern standards, but deeply human. In a few memorial records there is mention of something called the beast corner, the part of the cottage closest to the door. It made cleaning easier, and the animal's breath warmed the incoming air before it spread through the room. You look at the corner now where the animals lie and notice how the frost has melted on the inside wall, while the opposite side still glitters white. The warmth truly radiates from them like a second fire. A peculiar habit found in northern regions involved speaking softly to animals before sleep, a custom known as night words. Villagers whispered blessings or thanks to their cows and pigs, believing that kind words made them calmer through the night. You try it now, murmuring a few soft syllables, and the pig snorts approvingly, rolling onto its side. The air feels a little warmer for it. The family gathers near the hearth. The father stirs the fire while his wife mends a torn sleeve, the children giggle as a hen hops closer to the flames. No one seems to mind the company of beasts. It feels as natural as the smoke and the fire. The animals watch them, curious but calm, part of the nightly rhythm of the home. It is well recorded that some homes even had troughs built inside the doorways to feed the animals without letting in the cold. The line between barn and dwelling was barely visible. The human world and the animal world shared the same breath. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the layered sounds of life, the crackling of wood, the lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind outside. The steady breathing of sleepers, human and otherwise. It is a choir of endurance. You begin to understand that warmth was not just made by fire but by the nearness of living bodies, by the slow exchange of air and comfort between species. The fire burns low, and the cottage grows dim. You pull your blanket closer and feel the vibration of the animals shifting in their sleep. The air carries the earthy smell of life, raw and real. Outside the frost thickens on the thatch, but inside breath fogs the air in soft clouds. The warmth is not perfect, not pure, but it is enough. As your eyelids grow heavy, the pig grunts softly, the goat sigh and somewhere in the dark a hen clucks. Once before settling again, you smile in the half-light, knowing that tonight you will not freeze. You will sleep surrounded by warmth that breathes, hums and dreams with you. When you wake, the fire is little more than a whisper of red beneath its blanket of ash. Your breath still fogs in the air, but the chill is not as cruel as before. The air feels thicker, more muffled, as though the cottage itself has learned how to hold warmth. You pull yourself upright and run your hand along the wall beside you. The mud and straw are cold, but not frozen. Someone has stuffed the gaps between the timbers with moss, and it feels springy to the touch. You realize that this tiny act of patience has kept the frost from creeping in. Written records from medieval building guides and abbey accounts tell how people used simple materials for insulation long before the word existed. Dried moss, sheep's wool and tufts of straw were packed into cracks in walls and roofs. When properly stuffed, they formed a barrier against drafts and rain. Families worked together to gather these things in autumn, knowing that by January they might mean the difference between comfort and misery. You kneel to inspect the base of the wall, where more moss has been pressed between stones. It smells faintly green, a memory of forest floors now frozen beneath snow. Above, the rafters are wrapped in linen scraps to stop drips from melting frost. The sound of the wind outside has softened, no longer sharp. The cottage feels quieter, cocooned. An unusual practice recorded in northern villages describes how people hung heavy fabrics or woven mats along the inside walls. These hangings were not purely decorative but acted as insulation. In richer homes they became tapestries embroidered with hunting scenes or saints, but in poorer cottages they were simple pieces of sackcloth or old cloaks. Even so, they changed the atmosphere of a room, turning it from a space of survival into a space of rest. Archaeological evidence from preserved medieval houses shows small holes where wooden pegs once held these wall hangings in place. When they are reconstructed, the difference is immediate. Sound becomes softer, air feels warmer and the flicker of fire light glows more gently. You can imagine sitting here centuries ago, tracing the outline of a fabric fold while the storm roared outside. Some modern historians debate how conscious these choices were. Did villagers think in terms of insulation, or was it simply habit? Perhaps both. They may not have had words for thermal resistance, but they understood the feel of wind sneaking through a wall. Instinct taught them to block it with whatever they could find. A curious detail preserved in an old household account tells that families also covered floors with rushes mixed with dried herbs like rosemary and lavender, not just for fragrance but to trap heat rising from the fire. The rushes absorbed the day's warmth and released it slowly through the night. It was their version of a heated floor, simple and brilliant. You move closer to the hearth and poke at the ashes until a faint orange glow emerges. The warmth grows small but sure. Someone has hung a blanket across the doorway, and it flutters slightly with each draft. Behind it, the animals shift, hooves scraping softly on straw. The sound reminds you that insulation was not only in the walls but also in the way people arranged their lives. Every corner of the cottage was part of the same design. Every space used to hold heat. It is well recorded that medieval people also used layered bedding to preserve warmth. Beneath a coarse wool blanket they spread straw or even dry bracken, then covered it with old cloaks or sheep skins. The layers trapped air, creating a primitive version of what modern scientists would call thermal pockets. The effect was simple but powerful. It allowed people to wake alive instead of stiff and blue. One curious story from a 15th-century letter describes a man who boasted that he could sleep through any winter by bedding himself like an onion. He meant layering, of course, wrapping himself in fabric after fabric until he could barely move. Whether true or exaggerated, the image captures the human genius for comfort in impossible conditions. You stand now and test the air with your hand near the wall. The difference between inside and outside is startling. The cold presses like a fist beyond the dorm, but inside the air holds steady, still touched by the heat of last night's fire. You understand that warmth is not a single act but a daily defense, built and rebuilt in countless small ways. Some old abbey records mention the monks' habit of hanging woolen curtains around their beds in winter, creating small chambers within larger unheated halls. Even the poorest villagers practiced their own version of this by draping spare cloaks over sleeping spaces. Privacy and warmth were one and the same. As daylight deepens, the cottage hums with quiet life. Someone tends to the animals, the sound of their steps muffled by straw. The moss in the walls glows faintly green in the dim light. A pot bubbles softly, sending steam curling upward. The air carries no sharpness, now only a slow, even warmth. You sit beside the fire and rest your hand on the wall. Once more, beneath your palm you feel the pulse of life, trapped inside mud, straw and moss. It is not perfect, but it works. The wall breathes, like the forest it came from. You smile, realizing that insulation was not invented by science but discovered by human hands, by trial, by patience, by a quiet understanding that even the smallest things can keep death away. Outside, frost clings to the trees. Inside, your breath no longer fogs. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, lean toward the embers and let the warmth rise. It is the same warmth that has always belonged to those who learn to listen to their walls. Night stretches long inside the great hall. The air hums with quiet, the kind that comes only after hours of noise and feasting. You step softly across the rush-covered floor, hearing the faint rustle beneath your boots. The hall still smells of roasted meat and spilled ale, but the fire at its center has settled to glowing coals. Shadows cling to the corners like heavy curtains. Accounts from medieval estates describe these great halls as the hearts of manor life. They were not only dining rooms but sleeping chambers, workplaces and gathering spaces. The lord's retainers, servants and sometimes guests all shared the same roof, divided only by habit and furniture. At the far end, under a canopy, the lord and his family slept on raised platforms. The rest of the household arranged themselves wherever there was space, wrapped in cloaks or lying near the embers for warmth. You move closer to the hearth. The fire crackles faintly, a deep orange heart still pulsing within the ash. It gives off just enough light to reveal the hall's vastness. Wooden beams arch overhead like ribs and banners hang limp in the smoke, stained air. The walls are lined with shields and hunting trophies' dim outlines. In the flickering glow, you can almost hear the ghostly echoes of laughter from earlier, when the room was alive with song. An interesting note, in a 15th-century inventory mentions that rushes on the floor were often mixed with fragrant herbs, not only for scent, but also to disguise the staleness of the hall. After long nights of eating and drinking, they absorbed grease, smoke and the warmth of many feet. By morning, the smell of crushed mint and rosemary rose with the smoke from the rekindled fire. It was an old trick, simple and elegant. Archaeological reconstructions of great halls show that even these grand spaces were not truly warm. The high ceilings trapped heat far above the people and drafts crept in through cracks in the heavy doors. The hearth provided light and comfort to those closest to it, but just a few paces away, breath turned to mist. Servants wrapped themselves in cloaks and dogs curled against their masters' legs. Sharing the same heat, some historians debate whether these halls were symbols of community or hierarchy. The Lord sat in splendor, his chair closest to the fire, while servants slept on the outer edges where the cold bit hardest. Yet all breathed the same smoky air and woke to the same gray dawn. The fire united them as much as it divided them. You sit on a bench beside the dying fire. The coals glow like hidden jewels, their faint heat caressing your skin. Somewhere in the shadows someone snores softly, another coughs. The hall is alive even in stillness. You hear the wind push against the shutters, the gentle clatter of something stirring in the rafters, perhaps a pigeon or a mouse searching for crumbs. The fire sighs, throwing a brief flare of light that paints the walls gold before fading again. One curious custom mentioned in monastic chronicles tells of guards sleeping upright in the hall, their pikes resting beside them. They were meant to keep watch against intruders or fire, but many simply dozed, their dreams lit by the glow of embers. The chronicler jokes that the warmth of the hearth made even the most loyal men forget their duty. You can almost see them now, half awake, the flames reflected in their half-open eyes. The hall is quiet except for the rhythm of breathing, dozens of soft sounds blending into one. Each person here, noble or servant, drifts between wakefulness and sleep in the same orange glow. It feels strangely intimate, this shared vulnerability. Beneath the roof beams you sense that warmth in such a place comes less from the fire and more from the nearness of others. It is well documented that the great hall served as the Lord's power made visible. Guests judged his wealth by the size of the fire and the quality of the timber above it. Yet even the grandest flames left the corners cold. Some halls experimented with stone hearths and metal grates to draw in more air. Small steps toward efficiency centuries before science explained why you admire their persistence. A peculiar detail from an old household record notes that cats were kept in these halls not only for catching mice but because their presence was thought to bring calm to sleeping men. Their purring was believed to steady the heart and soothe bad dreams. You glance toward the edge of the firelight and see a cat curled on a cloak, its eyes half open, gleaming like twin embers. As the night deepens, the wind outside grows louder, the door cars and cold air slips through the gaps. Someone stirs and throws another log onto the fire. Sparks leap upward, briefly, lighting the carved beams above. You see the faces of sleeping men and women flicker in the glow, peaceful and unaware. Then the darkness folds over them again. You lean back against the bench and close your eyes. The warmth touches your face, gentle and constant. The smell of smoke clings to your hair and clothes. For a moment you are part of this great breathing space, this shared rhythm of exhaustion and endurance. The fire fades to embers, the hall sinks into quiet and the winter outside presses closer. Yet inside the warmth remains. Caught in the air, the wood and the memories of those who have found rest here for centuries. You drift to sleep in that same glow, under the same beams, surrounded by the steady pulse of human life that refuses to freeze. The morning begins with the toll of a distant bell. Its sound rolls through the frost-covered valley. Steady and solemn, you open your eyes to pale light filtering through narrow windows and the faint echo of chanting in the distance. The air smells faintly of damp stone and burning tallow. You are no longer in a village, but within the walls of an abbey, a place where silence and discipline rule the day. Here, warmth is not a matter of comfort but of order. Records from medieval monasteries describe in careful detail how monks organized their lives around the hours of prayer and the struggle against the cold. Their thick stone buildings held the chill like a memory. Yet through ingenuity and faith, they managed to endure winters that would have crushed weaker spirits. Each abbey was an experiment in balance between spiritual austerity and physical survival. You follow the sound of voices through a long cloister. The stones beneath your feet are cold enough to numb your toes, even through leather soles. Moisture clings to the walls, glistening in the faint light. The chanting grows louder as you approach the church, but it carries no warmth. Only calm, when the monks sing their breath, rises in small clouds, merging with the incense that fills the air. The scent is sharp, both sweet and smoky, cutting through the damp like sunlight. In the refectory, a few candles flicker against the grey stone. A monk ladles thin porridge into bowls, his movements slow and measured. The benches crack as others sit, their habits brushing softly against the floor. No one speaks. The silence feels like a second layer of clothing, insulating them more than wool ever could. Archaeological evidence reveals that monasteries were among the first places in medieval England to experiment with heating systems. Some babies built small channels, called flue, beneath their floors to carry warm air from distant fires. Others used double walls that trapped heat from kitchens and workshops. These early innovations were uneven but remarkable. Where peasants relied on animals and proximity, monks turned to structure and engineering. One curious discovery from the remains of Fountains Abbey shows a room once known as the warming house. It contained the only fire in the monastery apart from the kitchen. Monks were allowed to visit it only briefly, to warm their hands before returning to their duties. It was both blessing and temptation, a place where discipline met mercy. You can almost see them now standing in a circle around the fire, their faces lit orange against the grey stone, their breaths rising like prayers. Scholars continue to discuss how monasteries balanced their vows of poverty with the need for comfort. Some argue that warmth itself was seen as a spiritual weakness, something to be endured rather than sought. Others point out that monasteries preserved knowledge of architecture and craftsmanship that kept entire communities alive. In their pursuit of moderation, the monks may have stumbled upon wisdom far deeper than they intended. You move toward the closer garden where frost coats every leaf in silver. The air is still and the world feels suspended between prayer and silence. You brush a finger across a frozen rose and watch it sparkle in the dim light. Somewhere a monk coughs softly and the sound echoes against the walls. The cold is absolute, but so is the peace. A peculiar monastic rule, recorded at Glastonbury, instructed brothers to sleep in their habits to save both warmth and humility. Their woolen robes were thick, scratchy and heavy, with the smell of smoke and lanolin. Beneath them, they wore simple linen shifts, sometimes stuffed with straw for insulation. You can picture rows of monks lying on wooden pallets, each wrapped like a cocoon, breathing in unison. The fire outside might die, but their shared breath would keep the air alive. Inside the scriptorium, a monk bends over a parchment, his fingers stiff from cold. A small candle flickers beside him, the wax pulled around the base. The quill trembles in his hand, but the writing continues, slow and careful. He pauses now and then to warm his ink or rub his hands together. The smell of ink and smoke fills the narrow room. Centuries later, his letters will still be sharp as if the cold itself carved them. It is well recorded that some babies built their sleeping quarters above kitchens or bakeries, letting the heat rise through the floorboards. The smell of bread often drifted into their dreams for a few hours each night. They slept surrounded by warmth and the faint sweetness of grain. You imagine how those moments must have felt, like standing at the edge of heaven after days of cold. A rather touching anecdote from a monastic chronicle tells of a young novice who tried to smuggle a coal from the kitchen into his cell, hiding it in a cloth to keep warm. When discovered, he confessed and was forgiven on the condition that he share it with others. The story ends with the note that the brothers found warmth in charity more than in fire. The bells ring again, deep and resonant. The monks rise from their work and move toward the chapel. You follow your footsteps echoing alongside theirs. The air feels lighter now, warmer. Somehow, though, no new fire has been lit. Perhaps it is faith, perhaps simple rhythm. The chant begins once more, rolling through the cold air like the sound of flowing water. You stand in the doorway watching the flicker of candles against the stone. The abbey breathes in silence, in order, in the steady endurance of human will. The cold remains, but it has lost its cruelty here. It has become part of the discipline, part of the lesson that warmth, like holiness, is not always given freely but earned through persistence. Outside, frost glitters beneath a pale Sunday. Inside, the monks sing softly, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the season, and in that sound the winter feels almost gentle. The bells fade into silence, leaving only the soft echo of footsteps in the corridor. You step out from the abbey's gate into the pale morning light. The frost has thickened overnight, turning the grass into a carpet of white crystals. Ahead, the church rises, tall and solemn, its stone walls gleaming faintly. In the Sunday, the air is cold enough to bite. Yet when you push open the heavy wooden door, a different kind of chill greets you, still deep and holy. It is well known from ecclesiastical records that medieval churches were both spiritual centers and physical shelters. When storms howled across the countryside, villages gathered inside these vast stone halls. The thick walls built for eternity offered protection from both weather and fear. They were cold to the touch but unyielding, steadfast in a world of impermanence. You walk slowly down the nave, your footsteps echoing like whispers. The air smells of wax, stone, and faint incense from yesterday's mass. The light that filters through the small colored windows paints the frost outside in muted reds and blues. You can see your breath, a ghost, floating through sacred air. A few villagers kneel at the altar wrapped in rough cloaks. Their prayers rise like mist toward the thatched ceiling. Archaeological studies of medieval churches reveal ingenious efforts to create warmth in these immense spaces. Floors were often layered with straw or rushes replaced after feast days to keep them dry. Some larger churches built small side chapels with low ceilings where candles and human bodies could trap heat. The candles themselves gave off as much warmth as light. Each flame a tiny rebellion against the vastness of the cold. An interesting note in a parish record from Lincolnshire mentions that parishioners sometimes brought their own hot stones, wrapped in cloth to hold during long winter sermons. The stones were heated in hearths before dawn and carried carefully to church, turning hands red from their hidden glow. In a way, faith itself became portable warmth. Some historians continue to debate whether the chill of medieval churches was intentional. Perhaps the cold was meant to humble the body, so the spirit could rise above discomfort. Others believe it was merely unavoidable, a side effect of ambition. Whatever the case, the experience of standing in those echoing halls was not of pain but awe. The cold sharpened every sound, made every flame look brighter, every prayer feels heavier. You move closer to the altar where candles flicker beside a carved crucifix. Their scent of beeswax fills the air, soft and comforting. The priest's voice murmurs from the shadows, low and steady, his breath visible in the dim light. The congregation kneels, heads bowed their cloaks, brushing the floor for a moment. Everyone breathes together. The air grows warmer, or perhaps your body adjusts, finding peace in stillness. A curious custom recorded in several church accounts describes parish feasts held within these stone walls during the harshest winters. After prayers, the villagers would share bread and ale, their laughter echoing up to the rafters. The heat of the crowd, the smoke of torches and the smell of food would fill the building until the frost on the windows melted. It was both worship and survival, a communion of warmth as much as of faith. You sit on a bench near the door and watch as a few late-comers enter shaking snow from their cloaks. Their boots leave wet prints on the stone. A dog follows one of them and curls by the threshold, steam rising from its fur. The priest smiles but says nothing. Even the animals, it seems, are welcome here from the cold. It is recorded in old church maintenance logs that fires were occasionally lit in blazers during long vigils, though such acts were frowned upon by the clergy. The smoke would drift up into the rafters and linger for days, staining the stone black. Yet those stains, still visible centuries later, tell the story of bodies seeking warmth while souls sought salvation. One peculiar tale from a Yorkshire parish tells of villagers who slept overnight in the church during a fierce snowstorm. They huddled together near the candles, sang hymns until dawn and claimed afterward that the Virgin herself had walked among them bringing warmth where none should have been. Whether true or not, the story became part of local faith, retold every winter when frost returned. As the service ends, the priest raises his hands and the congregation answers with soft murmurs. Their voices echo through the stone arches, mingling with the sound of wind pressing at the doors. You can feel the moment linger in the air, fragile yet strong. When you step outside, the sunlight is blinding. After the dimness inside, the cold rushes back around you. But it feels different now, less cruel. Behind you, the church stands silent, its windows glowing faintly like embers in daylight. It is more than a building. It is a furnace for the spirit, its heat, invisible but enduring. You walk down the path toward the village. The air is filled with the distant sound of hammers and laughter, the rhythm of life continuing beneath the pale sky. The church bell rings once more, its voice rolling across the land, reminding everyone that warmth, faith and endurance often share the same sound. The snow begins to melt as you leave. The countryside behind the road turns to a ribbon of mud and the smell of smoke thickens in the air. Ahead, the town rises through the mist like a forest of roofs. Narrow houses lean together above the crooked streets, their upper floors almost touching. The sound of bells mixes with the creak of carts and the chatter of voices. It is here, in the cramped heart of a medieval town, that shelter takes on new meaning. Municipal records from the 14th century show that town houses were narrow but tall, each one pressed tightly against its neighbors. Builders worked with what little space the city allowed. The lower floors were shops or workshops, the upper rooms for sleeping and storage. The warmth of daily life gathered in the walls and the heat of one family often seeped into the next. Crowded as they were, these houses trapped warmth far better than open cottages. You walk beneath a timbered archway where the smell of bread and tallow candles fills the air. The sound of chopping wood and boiling water spills from open doors. The street feels alive, its noise bouncing between the close-packed buildings. When you touch the wall beside you, the plaster feels warm. Behind it, a hearth burns, its smoke curling through the chimney like a heartbeat rising into the sky. Archaeological studies of medieval towns confirm that density itself became insulation. Streets were narrow to block the wind and the houses shared supporting beams. Roofs overlapped in places, forming tunnels of shadow where rain rarely reached the ground. These streets may look chaotic now, but they were shaped by centuries of survival instincts, each crooked turn an answer to the cold. A curious record from York describes how neighbors sometimes built connecting doors between their attics, allowing warmth and gossip to pass freely. During the hardest winters, entire rows of houses became single shared shelters, their occupants bound together by necessity rather than friendship. You imagine the laughter and grumbling traveling through those upper rooms, carried on air heavy with smoke and stew. Inside one such townhouse you find a family gathered around a small hearth. The room is narrow, the ceiling low, but the space hums with heat, a pot of barley and cabbage bubbles on the fire. The windows are shuttered tight, covered with oiled cloth. The only light comes from the flames and a small tallow lamp on a shelf. You feel the warmth reach your face immediately, soft and close. It is recorded in merchant ledgers that city dwellers burned coal earlier than the countryside. The trade routes along rivers made it easier to transport, and its heat was steady. But coal brought its own smell, sharp and sour, clinging to hair and clothing. Chroniclers in London complained that smoke from coal turned the sky black and made the air taste bitter. Yet no one gave it up. The warmth was too valuable. Some historians still question whether city life truly offered more comfort than rural living. While the town houses were better at holding heat, the air inside them was often foul, heavy with soot and breath. Fires were small to save fuel, and smoke lingered in the low rooms. Yet people adapted, finding balance between air and warmth, between the desire to breathe and the need to survive. You look up the narrow staircase where a ladder leads to a loft above. The air grows thicker as you climb in the attic. Two children sleep under wool blankets, their faces flushed pink. The roof beams crack softly in the wind. Outside the sound of distant bells drifts through the cracks. The city hums even at night, a low lullaby of wheels, hooves, and laughter. An unusual custom mentioned in civic ordinances describes how residents heated their walls with flue vertical channels built beside hearths that carried smoke upward while warming the plaster. The idea spread slowly, and in time it turned into a primitive form of central heating. You can feel it now, the faint pulse of warmth in the wall beside you, as if the house itself were breathing below. The mother stirs the pot and adds a pinch of dried herbs. The smell fills the air, rich and earthy. The father repairs a wooden shoe by the fire, tapping gently with his hammer. The sound blends with the soft hiss of boiling broth. The scene feels timeless, almost outside of history. The room glows orange, a small island of life in the gray city. From outside, you hear voices calling to one another across the narrow street. A merchant closes his shutters, somewhere a woman laughs. The warmth of hundreds of fires merges above the rooftops into a haze of smoke glowing faintly in the moonlight. The air smells of coal ash and bread. It is not clean, but it is full of living. You realize that the city is its own form of hearth. Every alley, every window, every shared wall is part of a single breathing organism built against the cold. The people may not see it that way, but the city knows it holds them together through every frost. As you step outside, snow begins to fall again, dusting the narrow roofs. The glow of fire light shines through cracks in shutters. You walk down the street slowly, listening to the warmth of humanity echo from every wall. The houses seem to lean closer, as if they too seek comfort in one another, and for a moment the city feels less like stone and wood and more like a single beating heart in the middle of winter. You leave the narrow warmth of the main street and follow a muddy lane toward the edge of the town. The air grows colder again, sharper, thinner. The sounds of merchants and hammers fade until only the wind remains ahead beyond the last row of houses. The world feels quieter and forgotten. This is where the poor live, pressed against the walls of the city, surviving on scraps of warmth that drift outward from other people's fires. Chroniclers of the later Middle Ages often wrote about this borderland between safety and exposure. Towns were walled, but not everyone lived within them. The poorest workers, beggars, widows and wanderers built huts along the outer ditches or against the city gates. Their shelters were makeshift, often pieced together from discarded timber, broken carts and layers of rags or straw. When frost came, the walls of these shanties stiffened into brittle shells. You walk between these fragile homes, their roofs sagging under frost. Smoke seeps weakly from holes patched with cloth. The smell is sharp and bitter, the smoke of anything that burns: sticks, dung, scraps of cloth, even dried reeds from the river. A child peers at you from behind a cracked board. His cheeks sure with soot. Inside you can see a flicker of light, a tiny fire fighting against the wind that slips through every seam. An odd but poignant note in a town record from Norwich mentions that city guards sometimes allowed the destitute to sleep beside the gate. Fires meant to keep the hinges from freezing. The guards complained about the smell, but pied them enough to share a little warmth. You imagine those nights, people huddled in the shadows of the gates, the flickering glow painting their faces red and black, the city behind them just out of reach. Archaeological surveys along the outskirts of medieval towns reveal clusters of pits filled with ash and bone, traces of small fires built directly on the frozen ground. These were not hearths but last resorts, open blazes that smoked and died within hours. The people who lit them would sleep in circles around the embers, pulling scraps of cloth over their heads. The earth itself became both bed and blanket. Some historians still question how the poorest survived at all. Charity records mention bread and broth distributed at monasteries and churches, but shelter was harder to come by. Winter turned mercy into a form of architecture: a barn door left unlatched, a ruined wall that broke the wind, a cart covered in rags. These were homes enough for a night. The miracle was that anyone woke up in the morning. You stop at one hut built against the outer wall of the town. Its frame is a patchwork of old planks and its roof is little more than a net of sticks covered in moss and cloth. Inside, a woman stirs a pot of thin gruel over a handful of glowing coals. The warmth barely reaches her face. She glances up, nods and returns to her work. You can see that every movement is practiced, efficient, born of habit and necessity. The fire crackles weakly, fighting for air. A curious practice mentioned in several letters from city clerks describes how beggars would heat stones in communal fires, then carry them wrapped in cloth under their clothes. The stones stayed warm for hours, pressed against skin, turning body heat into endurance. It was a portable hearth, small and humble, but it kept them alive through the darkest nights. The smell of the hut is a mix of damp smoke and sour cabbage. It should be unpleasant, but there is something comforting in its honesty. Every scent tells a story of survival. The woman's hands are red from cold, yet her movements are steady. The child beside her coughs softly, then reaches for the spoon she offers him. For a moment you forget the cold entirely and see only persistence. It is well documented that towns enacted strict rules about who could build shelters near their walls, yet every winter the poor returned. The city needed them for labor in spring and so, unofficially, no one drove them away. They became part of the landscape, the invisible edge between civilization and wilderness. A peculiar superstition collected by a 17th-century historian recalls that some of these outcasts placed sprigs of holly in their huts during Christmastide, believing it would keep frost spirits away. Even in poverty, they sought to decorate life, to claim beauty amid hardship. You can picture those red berries glowing against the gray of mud and smoke. As night falls, the wind grows stronger and the huts creak softly under its touch. Fires inside flicker like stars about to die. The town's bells ring in the distance. Faint and solemn, the woman beside the coals tucks her child closer, humming a tune so soft that it seems part of the wind. The sound is almost too fragile to survive the air, yet it does. You step back and watch as the faint glow of the fire reflects on the snow outside her door. It is small, barely more than a breath of flame, but it burns with quiet defiance around it. Life endures not through luxury or invention, but through sheer will. The town behind the wall glitters with lamplight, but this, you think, is the truest warmth of all, the warmth that refuses to go out even when the world forgets to feed it. The wind stiffens as you cross the bridge toward the castle. Its stone walls rise from the mist like cliffs, their gray faces sure with centuries of rain. The towers seem endless, each crowned with frost. You can hear the dull clang of iron gates and the faint echo of boots on cobblestone. This is a place built for power, not comfort. Yet inside these walls, even kings shivered. Chroniclers of the royal courts describe winter in castles with reluctant honesty. The grandeur was impressive, but the cold was relentless. Fireplaces blazed in every hall, yet their heat vanished into the vastness of the rooms. Stone absorbs warmth and releases it slowly, making the air heavy and damp. You can imagine the nobles wrapped in layers of fur, huddled beside flames, taller than a man, still rubbing their hands for warmth. You step through the gate into the courtyard. The ground glitters with ice. Servants hurry past carrying bundles of firewood and buckets of ash. Smoke billows from narrow windows high above. The air smells of pitch and iron, mingled with the sharp tang of cold stone. Somewhere a horse stamps and snorts steam rising from its flanks. Inside the great hall, the fire roars within an enormous hearth, so large you could stand in it. The light flickers across the banners and tapestries lining the walls. A servant throws another log into the blaze and sparks dance upward, disappearing into the chimney. The warmth reaches you only faintly. The stone beneath your feet stays icy no matter how high the flames climb. Architectural records and surviving castles reveal clever but imperfect attempts to trap heat. Thick woolen tapestries covered the walls, not just for beauty but to stop drafts. Floors were strewn with rushes and straw to block the chill from below. Some rooms even had wall fires, small grates built into the masonry to warm private chambers. These innovations softened the cold but never banished it. A curious report from a royal servant describes how the queen of one court ordered her bed draped with fur-lined curtains that could be tied shut from within. The bed became a private cocoon, a room within a room. The servants warmed bricks in the kitchen and slipped them between the sheets before she slept. By morning the bricks had cooled to stone again, leaving only the scent of smoke and linen. Archaeological surveys confirmed that medieval castles stored heat unevenly. The kitchens filled with fires and ovens stayed almost tropical, while the long corridors and towers remained like caves. Servants sometimes lingered near the kitchens just to feel their blood again. The contrast between feast halls and chambers must have been startling. A wall of warmth one moment, a breath of frost the next. Scholars still discuss whether these castles were symbols of wealth or prisons of stone. Power demanded permanence, but permanence made warmth nearly impossible. The great walls that protected kings from enemies also trapped them within their own cold monuments. Yet even in this chill, life persisted with ceremony and grace. In a side chamber, a group of musicians tunes their instruments, fingers trembling in the cold. The sound of strings rises softly. Delicate and brave candles flicker against their faces, painting them gold against the gray walls. The lady of the house sits by the hearth, wrapped in furs. Her breath still clouds the air as she smiles faintly listening to the music. An old letter from a castle steward mentions that the king's dogs often slept in the royal bed chamber to provide warmth. The animals were prized for their loyalty, but also for their body heat. He writes of them curling beside their masters, as if guarding them from the frost itself. You can picture it now, the quiet room, the crackling fire, the gentle sighs of dogs dreaming in the half-dark. The scent inside the castle is layered smoke, tallow wool and the faint sweetness of spiced wine. The air near the windows, however, feels colder, edged with ice. You run your hand along the stone and feel water trickle down, condensation forming. Where heat meets frost, the contrast is startling, almost alive. It is well recorded that castle servants rose before dawn to light fires in every chamber. Some carried long iron tongs with glowing coals from room to room, singing softly to keep themselves awake. By the time the nobles stirred, the fires were already roaring. Yet within an hour the cold began to creep back, slow and steady, as a tide. A rather touching story survives from a northern fortress where a cook was said to have shared her only fur cloak with the stable boy one freezing night. When asked why, she replied that the rich have walls but the poor have each other. The tale may be apocryphal, but it captures something true. Even here, surrounded by stone, survival depended on shared warmth. As the evening deepens, the hall grows louder. Servants carry platters, dogs chase scraps and laughter fills the smoky air. The fire blazes, brighter shadows leaping across the walls. For a moment it feels almost warm, as if the castle has decided to forgive the winter. Yet beyond the walls, frost creeps silently over the battlements, patient and eternal. You step outside into the courtyard once more. The stars shimmer above the towers. Distant and cold, the castle looms behind you, its windows glowing faintly like embers in a mountain of ice. You realize that no matter how high the flames burn inside, the true warmth of this place lies not in the fire but in the people who refuse to let it die. The morning light seeps through a haze of smoke, painting the sky in pale gray. You stand outside the castle gate and watch a line of villagers walking toward the woods, each carrying a small axe or bundle of rope. The frost crunches beneath their boots. Their breaths rise together white against the cold air. They move slowly, heads down toward the trees that have fed their fires for generations. Historical accounts from royal forests and village rolls record the same struggle year after year, the search for fuel. Wood was the heartbeat of survival. Every hearth, every forge, every kitchen depended on it. But by the late Middle Ages forests across England had begun to thin. Too many winters, too many fires. The people turned to the woods each season, knowing they were slowly cutting away their future warmth. The path grows darker as you follow them. Beneath the bare branches, the air smells of sap and cold bark. You can hear the rhythmic thud of axes biting into trunks, followed by the long sigh of falling wood. Each impact echoes through the silence like a heartbeat. The villagers work quickly. Their hands numb, their breath ragged. The sound of cracking timber feels almost like prayer. It is recorded in forest law documents that gathering wood without permission was a serious crime in royal lands. Yet everyone did it. Peasants risked fines or imprisonment for the right to keep their children from freezing. The rule said only fallen branches could be taken. But in the depths of winter no one waited for trees to fall. Naturally, a single armful of dry wood could mean another night of life. An interesting note in a memorial report from the 15th century describes how communities organized wood watches, groups of villagers who gathered at dawn to cut and carry fuel together, each taking their share home before the banff arrived. The work was quiet, disciplined, almost military. You can imagine them moving through the snow like shadows, axes rising and falling in rhythm. Archaeological evidence from charcoal pits and old peat cuttings shows that when forests grew scarce, people turned to the earth itself for fuel. Peat, dried and stacked in blocks, became the new firewood of the poor. It burned slow and smoky, filling homes with a heavy scent of earth. Those who lived near rivers dug out pea bogs in summer and stored the bricks in sheds, knowing that each one would glow red in winter like a promise kept. Scholars still discuss whether deforestation changed the social order of medieval England. Some argue that scarcity drew communities together, forcing cooperation and shared rights to woodland. Others believe it deepened divisions, giving power to those who controlled the trees. What cannot be denied is that firewood became a form of currency, as valuable as bread. A curious detail from one parish account mentions that disputes over fallen branches sometimes turned violent. Two families fought over a single log that had floated down a flooded river and both were fined for disturbing the king's peace. The record ends with a note that the wood was claimed by neither side but burned in the manor hall for Judgment Day. You can almost smell the irony in the smoke. You walk deeper into the woods, the air grows still, the silence heavy. A man kneels beside a stump, splitting smaller logs with a hatchet. The blade sings through the air, the sound bright and precise. Chips of wood scatter around him like snowflakes. He pauses to wipe his brow, then stacks the pieces carefully in a rope net. His hands are red, cracked from frost, but his movements are steady. Every cut carries the rhythm of survival. The smell of resin thickens as more trees fall. Somewhere nearby someone whistles a low tune to keep the pace. The forest echoes with it as if humming in return. You realize that this ritual has been performed for centuries, each winter carving the same scars into the land. It is well documented that as wood grew scarce, some villages adopted communal storage sheds for firewood the poorest could take from them when their own piles ran low. The wood was marked with symbols, lines, crosses or simple initials to show who had contributed. It was a quiet system of generosity, a way to survive without shame. A rather unusual practice, mentioned in the writings of a friar, tells of people blessing their wood piles at the start of winter, sprinkling them with salt and muttering prayers that the fire might burn bright and kindly. The gesture may have been superstition, but it gave comfort. Fire was more than warmth. It was faith made visible. By evening, the villagers begin their return. The sound of dragging sledges echoes across the fields. Each bundle of logs leaves a dark trail in the snow. You walk with them, feeling the weight of the forest behind you and the pull of home ahead. The air smells of wood smoke and sweat of effort and endurance. As you near the village, chimneys begin to smoke again, thin ribbons of gray rising into the twilight. You realize that each column of smoke represents a victory, small but real. The fires will burn tonight, the children will sleep, the frost will stay outside a little longer. You look back at the forest, its edges, dim and quiet. The trees stand like sentinels, half vanished but still defiant. The wind moves through them with a sigh that sounds almost human. You understand, then, that survival has always been a conversation between people and the land. Every spark of warmth is borrowed, every ember a debt to the world that gave it the air. Inside the cottage hums softly with warmth. Outside the world is still white, but in here the smell of food fills the space, thick and comforting. The fire burns low and steady, licking at the blackened pot that hangs from an iron hook. Steam rises, curling into the rafters and clinging to the thatch. Someone stirs the pot with slow, careful motions, and the sound of wooden spoon against iron becomes a kind of music. Household records and letters from the late Middle Ages reveal how meals were more than nourishment. In winter, they were acts of preservation. People gathered around the hearth not only to eat but to stay alive through the night. Food was warmth, fire disguised as flavor. Most of what they ate was humble pottage, a thick stew of whatever could be spared on cold nights like this. Even thin broth carried the comfort of survival. You peer into the pot. The stew is bubbling lazily, a mixture of barley, onions, and bits of dried meat. The smell is earthy, rich, and faintly smoky from the wood fire. Beneath, a few herbs float on top, they're green, faded but still fragrant. When the woman stirs, the steam bathes her face in mist, softening every line. The air around her glows golden in the firelight. It is well known from manor inventories that winter meals often lasted hours, with daylight short and work limited. People lingered around the hearth talking quietly while the stew thickened, bread baked on the hearthstones or in clay ovens beside the fire. The heat from cooking did double duty, warming both food and people. The rhythm of boiling and stirring became the heartbeat of the home. A curious entry in a monastic cookbook mentions that barley pottage was said to comfort the chest during cold months. It was not just food, but medicine infused with herbs thought to protect against fever. Mint, sage, or thyme might be added if available. Whether or not it worked, the scent alone must have lifted spirits, a reminder that warmth could be tasted as well as felt. Archaeological evidence from hearth remains shows blackened stone stained with layers of soot and fat, proof of decades of cooking in the same place. Some stones were worn smooth where pots rested year after year. You can picture the countless meals they held, each one a quiet celebration of endurance. Some historians continue to debate how communal meals shaped medieval life. In small cottages, everyone shared the same pot dipping bread into the broth. Richer households served courses, each dish carried with ceremony, but in both the act of eating together dissolved barriers for an hour or two. Hunger, cold, and class gave way to something universal. A strange but endearing note from a 14th-century diary tells of villagers singing softly while stirring their pottage, believing it helped the stew thicken evenly. The writer claims he tried it himself and swore it worked. You can almost hear the tune now, low and steady, blending with the hiss of the fire. The cottage glows brighter as more people gather. The father returns from the woods, his arms full of damp logs. He shakes off snow and adds a piece to the fire. The flame jumps higher, its light flickering over the faces around the hearth. The pot bubbles more fiercely now, sending bursts of steam into the air. The smell fills every corner with the room until it feels like something you could rest inside. It is recorded in household manuals that families saved their best ingredients for winter feasts. On special nights they added bacon fat, a handful of peas, or even a dried apple for sweetness. Food was rationed carefully through the season, but celebration still found its way to the table. The warmth of those nights lingered longer than the meal itself. A rather touching custom mentioned in old parish notes describes families sharing leftover broth with neighbors. The poorest might receive a clay bowl left quietly by their door. No words were exchanged, just the shared knowledge that warmth belonged to everyone. In this way, kindness became another form of insulation, holding the cold at bay through generosity. The sound of eating fills the cottage now, spoons scraping, soft laughter, a sigh of relief after the first bite. The stew is thick, the bread rough, but warm. For a moment the wind outside loses its voice. The flames glow, steady, reflected in the children's eyes. Every sense tells you that this is what safety feels like. When the pot is empty, the fire dies down to coals. The family leans closer together, their bellies full, their faces drowsy. In the fading light, the smell of cooked barley and smoke lingers long after the last ember fades. The children curl up on straw mats. The parents whisper quietly, and soon only the fire's slow breathing remains. You sit for a while longer watching the last traces of steam disappear into the dark rafters. The warmth in the room feels alive, a spirit built from food, flame and company. Outside frost gathers again on the windows, but inside it cannot reach you. You understand then that food was never just sustenance, it was a ceremony of warmth, a promise shared with every bite, that life would continue tomorrow. The fire wakes you before the light does. The air inside the cottage feels heavier, thick with smoke and breath. Outside, the frost returns, silvering the thatch. You pull yourself up and hear the faint sound of coughing. It begins with the child, then the mother, a dull, rasping rhythm that fills the small room. The fire that kept them alive through the night has also filled their lungs with ash. Memorial accounts and early medical texts describe how winter sickness haunted medieval England like another season. The smoke from hearths without chimneys, blackened ceilings, lungs and throats alike. Winter cough, as some healers called it, claimed more lives than hunger. You can almost feel it now, that tightness in your chest, the taste of soot lingering in your mouth. The woman moves to the hearth, stirring the ashes to coax out the last red glow. Her breath hitches as she bends a wheeze, escaping her lips. Still she works quietly, practiced, in the balance between fire and suffocation. When she blows gently into the coals, a swirl of gray smoke fills the air, again, curling around her face before escaping through the hole in the roof. It is well recorded in local parish chronicles that people believed sickness came from bad airs, heavy vapors that clung to rooms. They did not yet understand infection. Only that foul smells brought death. To fight them, they burned herbs or scattered crushed juniper across the floor. The sharp scent cut through the smoke, though it did little to change what they breathed. An odd but tender remedy described in one physician's manual advised mothers to warm ale with honey and garlic for their children's coughs. It was medicine born of the hearth, simple and soothing. You can picture the steam rising from a wooden cup, the faint sweetness masking bitterness, the mother's hand guiding the drink to her child's lips. Archaeological findings from preserved village sites reveal layers of soot coating the rafters, sometimes thick enough to preserve the imprint of woven thatch beneath centuries of smoke became part of the architecture, embedding sickness in the very structure of homes. The same warmth that kept the cold out turned the air into a slow poison. Scholars continue to discuss how medieval people balanced this cruel paradox. Some argue that they accepted it as the cost of survival, while others believe they sought constant small improvements, higher smoke holes, slightly raised hearths, makeshift vents. Whatever their reasons, they lived in the same dance between fire and breath that humanity still knows. You step outside for air and the frost bites sharply at your face. The sky is pale and clear. The surrounding cottages send up thin ribbons of smoke rising straight into the cold morning. It looks peaceful from here, almost beautiful, but you know what that smoke carries. Inside every home, people cough, sniffle and mutter small prayers between breaths. A curious superstition mentioned in a rural account from Somerset tells that families would open their doors for a moment at sunrise to let the evil vapors escape. They called it releasing the night. You can imagine them standing in the doorway, faces half asleep, breathing in the cold air, as if to wash their lungs for a few seconds. The home exchanged breath with the morning and the day began. You return indoors and the warmth wraps around you, again heavy but familiar. The children sit near the fire, faces flushed, while the mother crushes dried herbs in a small bowl. The smell of thyme and sage fills the air, sharp and green, mingling with the smoke. She murmurs a short prayer. As she sprinkles the mixture onto the coals, the fire hisses and releases a thin, fragrant vapor. For a moment the air feels clean. It is recorded in monastic infirmary notes that monks prescribed similar fumigations for the sick. They believed smoke could purify both body and soul. Some burned frankincense or rosemary, others simple straw. The act was half medicine, half ritual, in the dim light of the cottage. The same logic lives on. A rather haunting entry in a medieval coroner's roll tells of an old man found dead beside his fire, his face darkened with soot but his expression peaceful. The scribe wrote that he slept too near the blessing. The phrase lingers both tragic and poetic. To die in warmth was still better than to die in the cold. You sit quietly by the hearth, the smoke curling around you like a slow river. The air tastes of ash and herbs. You breathe carefully, feeling the warmth settle deep in your chest. Outside, the wind presses against the door, testing the cracks, but inside there is still light, still life. When the coughing fades, the room grows still again. The mother hums a lullaby, her voice rough but steady. The child drifts to sleep beside her, curled beneath a thin blanket. The fire flutters and sighs, casting faint shadows that move like ghosts on the wall. You know that by morning the coughing will return, but for now the house is quiet, the warmth enough to make breathing easy again. You close your eyes and listen to the fire's slow rhythm, thinking of the thousands of homes just like this one breathing smoke and life into the cold. Each hearth is both healer and hazard, a reminder that comfort always carries a price, and yet it is a price no one hesitates to pay. The sun climbs slowly through a pale winter sky and the snow outside has begun to melt into thin ribbons of water. You step out into the chill morning air and see a group of villagers gathered near a large frame of poles. They are stretching wool and linen across them, the fabric stiff with frost. Their hands are red, their breath clouding the air. Yet there is laughter among them. The steady rhythm of work turning hardship into ritual. Manor accounts and craft records describe how spinning and weaving were not only sources of livelihood but defenses against the cold. Every thread, every length of fabric carried warmth from one season to the next. Cloaks, tunics, blankets and wall hangings all began in moments like this, hands moving patiently, twisting fibers into strength. The tools were simple, yet the results were precious. You walk closer and hear the creak of the spinning wheel. A woman sits on a stool beside it, her foot pushing the treadle in slow rhythm. The wheel hums like a whispering song. Her fingers twist the wool into a thin, steady thread that coils around the spindle. The movement is so fluid it feels ancient, as though it has always existed. It is recorded in the household manuals of the 14th century that winter spinning was a communal task. Families gathered indoors by the fire, spinning and mending while stories filled the air. The sound of the wheel joined the crackle of the flames and conversation softened the long nights. Spinning was work, but it was also company, a way to weave time itself into something warm. A curious note in a cloth merchant's journal mentions that some people added oil to their wool before spinning to make it more supple in cold weather. The smell of the oil, mixed with the scent of landline from the fleece, creating a fragrance both sweet and animal, you can almost feel it in the air now. The tang of labor, the warmth of creation. Archaeological evidence from old textile workshops shows that many rural households produced their own cloth. Spindles carved from bone and whorls made of baked clay have been found beside hearths. The hearth was not only the source of heat but the center of industry. The same fire cooking stew by day and drying dyed yarn by night. Some researchers continue to debate how much of medieval England's textile skill came from professional guilds and how much from home. Perhaps the two worlds intertwined? The finest linen might come from towns, but the strongest wool was spun in cottages, where fingers had learned patience from the cold itself. You watch as the woman winds her finished thread into a she, then passes it to a young girl who dips it into a pot of dye. The water hisses faintly, releasing steam tinted with faint blue. The smell of herbs and wet wool fills the air. They are using wheat, a plant once so valuable that entire villages grew rich from its trade. Its blue was deep and steady, the color of twilight frozen into fabric. A peculiar bit of folklore preserved in a regional tale says that people believed dye could protect the wearer from frost. Warriors once painted their skin with it, and later shepherds wore blue cloaks through winter. Whether it helped or not, the color itself carried the promise of endurance. Inside the cottage, lengths of fabric hang from wooden poles, drying slowly in the smoky warmth. They sway slightly when the door opens, releasing a scent of damp wool and ash. The air hums with the faint rhythm of weaving. The loom stands in the corner, its frame heavy and graceful. A man pulls the shuttle through the threads, his movements steady and hypnotic. The thud of the beater echoes through the room like a heartbeat. It is well documented that looms were among the most valuable possessions in a peasant's home. They took up space but paid for themselves in warmth. Coarse wool became blankets, lighter weaves turned into tunics or hoods. Every scrap mattered. When fabric tore, it was patched and repurposed until nothing remained but rags to be twisted into cords or packed into wall cracks for insulation. One charming but odd superstition mentioned in a medieval household guide warns weavers never to leave a loom unfinished overnight. The spirits of the house, it was said, might tangle the threads out of mischief. So before, dark workers covered their looms with cloth or said a small prayer for protection. You imagine them whispering over the frame as the fire dimmed, their breath fogging in the cold air. The weaver now pauses to stretch his face, glowing with the effort. The fire beside him burns, softly, warming his hands. The fabric before him gleams faintly in the flickering light, a tapestry of survival made from patience and motion. The threads hum with quiet purpose, the same rhythm that has carried the village through every winter. As night falls, the spinning and weaving slow, the tools are put away, the dyed fabric hung near the hearth to dry. The room smells of smoke, wool and faint sweetness from the W. The people sit together, their shoulders touching their work done for the day. The walls are lined with the fruits of their labor, rolls of cloth folded neatly, blankets draped over benches, proof that warmth can be made by hand. You watch them in silence and feel a deep calm. The fire crackles and the wheel spins once more before stopping. In that stillness, you understand that what they have built is not only fabric but connection, each thread binding them to one another and to the promise of tomorrow's fire. The sky is clear and brittle, the kind of blue that makes every sound seem sharper. You walk along the frozen lane, past the last cottages toward the river. The ice there glimmers like glass, split by dark veins of water. A few figures move across it, cautious but steady, pulling sleds of reeds and rushes. Their laughter carries through the still air, bright and human. Chronicles of rural England record that in the hardest winters rivers became both barrier and blessing. The frozen surface allowed people to travel quickly, even haul goods, between villages, while the reeds growing along the banks became tools of warmth. They were cut, dried and woven into mats, baskets and roofing. What grew in water became defense against the wind. You kneel near the edge, running your hand along a frozen stalk. It is smooth and strong, pale yellow in the sunlight. The faint smell of damp earth lingers. Nearby, a man kneels beside a bundle of rushes, binding them tightly with rope. He nods as you approach his face, hidden beneath layers of wool for the floor. He says simply, "It is well documented in domestic accounts that rushes were a staple of medieval homes. Spread across the floor, they trapped warmth, absorbed dampness and softened every step. Twice a year, usually at midsummer and minimus, they were replaced with fresh ones. But in the depth of winter, new rushes meant comfort restored. The sound of them crackling underfoot was the sound of a home breathing again." An intriguing entry in a London steward's journal mentions that wealthy households perfumed their rushes with herbs or crushed petals before laying them. The poor, lacking such luxury, relied on the clean scent of dried plants alone. Yet even without perfume, the rush floor turned a bare room into something living. The plants released a faint, sweet fragrance when trampled, a reminder of summer long gone. Archaeological finds in long-abandoned cottages show layers of rush mixed with ash, bone and seeds pressed deep into the earth. Each layer marks a year of life, of meals of fire, light and footsteps. To walk upon them was to walk upon memory. Some historians continue to discuss whether the constant use of rush flooring made homes less clean or more comfortable. Modern minds might imagine filth, but the reality was gentler. Rushes kept feet dry and cold air away in the flickering half-light of a single candle. The green-gold floor must have looked like a meadow trapped inside stone. A curious old saying recorded by a priest goes, "New rushes, new luck." Villagers believed that changing the floor in winter could drive out illness and sorrow. It was both hygiene and superstition, practicality wrapped in hope. You can picture a family kneeling together sweeping out the old rushes, the dust swirling in shafts of pale sunlight, the scent of earth rising as new life spread across the floor. The rush gatherers on the riverbank work with steady rhythm. The women slice through the reeds with curved knives, stacking them in neat piles. The sound is crisp, rhythmic, almost musical. Frost clings to the cut stems, glittering before it melts. In the Sunday they tie the bundles tightly their hands, quick, despite the cold. Each sheath is a promise carried home on their shoulders. You follow them back toward the village along the way. The scent of wood smoke grows stronger when they reach the cottages. The rushes are spread to dry by the fire. The room fills with a smell of damp grass and clean air. Children help scatter them, their laughter echoing in the small space. For a few moments it feels like summer again, the warmth of memory flooding back through the smell of sun and soil. It is recorded in the household notes of a 15th-century manor that rushes also lined sleeping spaces. People laid them beneath blankets or even under mattresses of straw. The stems creaked softly with movement, a sound like whispers in the dark. The rustle was comforting. The same sound heard on summer river banks now carried into the heart of winter. A peculiar habit noted in folk tradition describes villages burning old rushes at the start of the new year, believing the smoke carried away misfortune. The flames would crackle and flare green from the oils in the stalks and people watched silently, each thinking of the year to come. As night falls, the newly laid rushes glow golden in the firelight. The floor smells fresh and clean. The children lie on it near the hearth, tracing patterns with their fingers. The mother hums softly, her voice mingling with the faint hiss of burning logs. The rushes shift beneath her feet, whispering with each step a chorus of soft sound that fills the silence between breaths. Outside, frost creeps once more across the fields, but inside the scent of river plants and fire creates a gentler kind of world. You sit quietly watching the flames reflect in the new floor and realize that survival is often built from small things, a handful of reeds, a day's labor. The memory of summer brought home to meet the winter. The thaw begins quietly. It starts with a sound, the faint drip of melting frost from the eaves. You lie still for a moment listening. The air in the cottage feels lighter, less sharp, though the smell of smoke still lingers in your clothes. Outside, the snow has softened to slush and the first patches of earth peek through. You step out into the weak sunlight and for the first time in weeks, you hear birds. Their voices sound uncertain, like instruments being tuned after a long silence. Records from medieval chronicles describe this fragile time between winter and spring as both relief and danger. The ice broke, but the mud swallowed carts. The cold eased, but sickness often struck hardest when warmth returned. People called it the hungry gap, the season when winter stores were nearly gone and the fields not yet ready to give back. Survival shifted from endurance to patience. You walk toward the fields where the ground glistens, dark and wet. A man bends to test the soil with his hand nodding quietly. Behind him, a boy carries a basket of tools patched with wire and hope. The smell of thawed earth fills the air. Damp, heavy and faintly sweet steam rises from the fields. As sunlight touches the frost, it feels as though the land is breathing again. Archaeological studies of medieval farms reveal how villagers used this short window to prepare for planting. They mended fences, patched roofs and gathered the last dry wood before the spring rains. The energy of the community shifted from hiding to rebuilding. In every hammer stroke and every footprint in the mud you can sense the rhythm of renewal. A peculiar custom noted in a parish ledger describes how people lit small bonfires in the thawing fields, offerings of thanks to the earth for surviving another winter. They tossed dried herbs into the flames, watching the smoke rise like prayers. The heat from those fires marked both farewell and beginning the last glow of winter, giving birth to spring. Inside the cottages, the changes are subtle but real. The rushes on the floor smell stronger now, releasing their grassy scent as the air warms. The animals shift restlessly, sensing the season's turn. The fires burn, smaller, more for cooking than survival. The smoke no longer clings to the ceiling, it drifts lazily upward, as if reluctant to leave. It is well recorded that during this time people cleaned their hearths, scraping soot from the stones and sweeping ash into the fields as fertilizer. The act was both practical and symbolic, a purging of the old season. The gray dust carried traces of every meal, every story, every cough of winter returned to the earth. It became the seed of warmth for next year. A curious entry from a friar's diary tells of villagers who opened their doors wide for a single day each spring, letting the cold wind sweep through the house. They called it the cleansing. Everything that had been shut tight for months, the air, the light, the hearts, was allowed to breathe again. The rush of fresh wind through smoky rooms was said to chase away sickness and sorrow alike. Scholars still debate whether medieval people truly saw spring as rebirth or simply as reprieve. Their songs and prayers speak of gratitude but also caution. They knew how quickly frost could return, how fragile warmth really was. Perhaps that is why they celebrated the smallest signs, a bird's cry, a drip of water, the first green blade pushing through the soil. You return to the village and find it buzzing with quiet work. A woman scrubs a wooden bowl with sand, singing softly to herself. A child pours melted snow into a bucket, watching it catch the light. The air smells faintly of wet straw and clean water. The sound of laughter comes from somewhere behind the cottages. Life has begun to stretch again, tentative but determined. An endearing but odd note from a local song collected centuries later says, "When the mud takes your boot, spring takes your breath." The words capture this season perfectly, clumsy, messy, hopeful. Every step is both a struggle and a joy. As evening falls, the fires in the cottages burn, low but steady. The smoke rises into clear sky, no longer pressed down by frost. The stars return, sharp and cold, but the air beneath them feels softer. Inside, the people rest, their bodies still heavy from months of effort, but their spirits lifting. You sit by the door, feeling the cool breeze slide over your skin, the scent of thawed earth and smoke fills your lungs. It is not warmth yet, not truly, but it is the promise of it. You realize that this is what medieval survival meant, not the absence of hardship, but the ability to find beauty in the smallest signs of change. The frost will come again. Of course, the cold never truly leaves England, but tonight the land exhales and so do you. For the first time in a long while, you breathe without fear. The morning arrives quietly, soft as breath. Mist curls along the hedge, blurring the line between sky and earth. You wake to the sound of dripping water, each drop striking the thawed ground with patient rhythm. The world feels tender again, as though winter has loosened its grip at last. The air carries the scent of wood smoke fading into damp soil, a perfume of endings and beginnings. Chroniclers from the late medieval period often wrote of this moment when warmth first returned to the land. It was not a sudden triumph, but a slow surrender, a series of small miracles, ice melting from the eaves, birds returning to the trees, the first buds swelling beneath cold bark. The people did not cheer, they simply exhaled, as if remembering how to breathe. You walk through the village and see doors left open for the first time in months. Smoke no longer clings to the air but drifts upward in graceful spirals. The cottages, once sealed tight against frost, now breathe with the weather. Inside each doorway you glimpse movement, women sweeping out, old rushes mending tools, children chasing the light as it spills across the floor. It is recorded in manor rolls that spring cleaning was both duty and ceremony. Every surface was scrubbed, every half emptied, every trace of soot carried out to the garden. Ashes from the winter fires were scattered into the fields as offering mixed with new seed. The people believed it made the earth fertile again, and perhaps it did. The scent of ash and soil mingled in the air, heavy with the memory of survival. An endearing note in a parish ledger mentions that neighbors exchanged small gifts at the first, eggs, herbs or candles saved from feast days. The gesture was simple, a quiet acknowledgement that they had endured together. No one spoke of the cold. There was no need. It lingered in their bones, but it no longer ruled their days. Archaeological traces show that these moments of renewal left marks even in the soil. Charcoal pollen and seeds lie together in layers beneath old villages, proof of the yearly rhythm of fire, hunger and growth. The pattern repeats endlessly, as if the land itself keeps time with human hope. A curious custom from certain shires involved lighting a single candle at dusk on the first truly warm day. Families gathered in silence watching the flame until it gutted out. They said it carried the last breath of winter away. The house then belonged to spring. You can almost see the faint glow reflected in tired eyes, the quiet gratitude that needed no words. Some historians still wonder what warmth meant to those who lived then. To us, it is comfort. To them, it was salvation. It was the proof that faith, whether in God, the seasons or simple endurance, had not been misplaced. The fire, the hearth, the roof above their heads, the body beside them, all were miracles repeated daily until they became ordinary again. You walk beyond the village to where the fields begin. The ground is soft underfoot, speckled with the first shoots of green. The river runs free now, its surface shining like glass under the pale. Sunday you kneel and touch the soil. It is cold but alive. The scent of mud clings to your fingers, mingled with the faint sweetness of new grass. At that moment you remember every sound of winter, the crack of ice, the hiss of peat, the whisper of straw, the sigh of fire dying low. Each memory carries weight, yet none feel cruel anymore. They have become part of the story of endurance, the long conversation between humanity and the season that tried to silence it. It is written in the journals of travelers that spring in England never arrives all at once. It steals in softly, unnoticed, until one day you realize you have not shivered in hours. You look up and see the sky bluer than it has been in months. You hear laughter instead of coughing. The fires burn slower, their smoke thinner, their warmth now gentle instead of desperate. A rather touching proverb from an old prayer book says, "The heart keeps the fire when the wood is gone." You think of the people you have watched through these long months, the mothers stirring their pots, the carpenters shaping beams, the monks whispering prayers through frozen breath. And you understand what the words mean. Warmth was never only a flame. It was faith made visible in every act of care. As you walk back toward the village you pass a cottage door left wide open. Inside a woman hums as she washes a wooden bowl, a cat stretches in the sunlight. The air smells of clean rushes and baking bread. The smoke from the hearth drifts gently out the chimney, pale and calm. The sound of a hammer echoes from somewhere nearby, fixing something for the next season. Life moves forward quietly, as it always does. You pause on the hill above the fields and look back. The roofs gleam in the light, each one a mark of human will. The fires that once fought the darkness now burn for comfort, not survival. The cold will come again, but the people will be ready. They have built their shelters, their tools, their memories, and their courage into the very bones of the land you breathe in deeply. The air is cool, fragrant, with thawed soil and distant woods. The world feels new, but also ancient, caught between endings and beginnings. The story of warmth continues, not in the fire but in every hand that tends it, and so, as the day fades into gold, you let your eyes close for a moment. The sound of the river, the murmur of voices, the faint crackle of distant hearths all merge into a lullaby of peace. The cold is gone for now. The land sleeps lightly beneath your feet, and you too drift into stillness, knowing that the long winter has finally released its hold. The fire inside your thoughts burns low now, steady and calm. The voices of the villages fade, replaced by the slow rhythm of your own breathing. The world outside is quiet, the air feels softer, warmer, as if the earth itself is sighing with relief. You imagine walking once more through that English village. The snow has melted, leaving narrow streams along the road. The cottages glimmer in the last light of dusk, their chimneys trailing thin lines of smoke that vanish into the sky. A door opens somewhere, spilling a faint glow across the mud. You hear laughter, then silence again. In that silence lies everything you have learned tonight, that warmth is never only a thing made by fire, but something built from patience, care and hope. It hides in the work of hands, in the breath shared between people, in the courage to face each new season without knowing how long it will last. The people you met have long turned to dust, but their fires still burn in every home that stands against winter, every wall built to keep out the cold, every blanket pulled tight, every light left burning in the dark is an echo of them. Now the story has quieted. The wind outside has softened to a murmur. The rhythm of your breath matches the rhythm of the earth, slowly waking. Let your thoughts loosen, let the warmth you have carried through this long journey settle deep inside you, steady and safe. Close your eyes, feel the fire dim to a gentle glow. Somewhere far away, the last snow melts under a rising Sunday. Everything is still, everything is warm. Everything, at last, is quiet.